Hello ladies and gentlemen, I hope I'm going live. This is Mark Tech with extreme OBS problems, but nevertheless enthusiastic to talk about a recap, or to provide a recap about the Wonderlust event that we've all experienced yesterday. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. We've had quite a lot of live views, so I'm very grateful for that. And now I will be checking if my stream actually works, because OBS was once again driving me crazy. So just briefly checking. Yes, it seems to work now. That's incredible. That should be self-explanatory that I am really worried about it. It should work. I do have the latest macOS Sonoma beta, and it didn't really fix it, but at least a reboot does. So, what are we going to do today? Well, we are first going to go through a small series of hands-on and immediate reaction videos from large YouTubers. MKBHD, MrMobile, and Linus Tech Tips. Of course, this channel does have its own history with LTT, so I'm quite curious. I have not spoiled myself when it comes to pre-experiencing, so no pre-watch here. Beyond that, I'll probably gonna outline very briefly again what I already bought and what I still plan on buying this Friday, Kelso Pre. For anyone who didn't watch last stream, I'm buying the iPhone 15 Pro Max. And beyond that, I think we can all just go through whatever tech specs we're still curious about. And then in the next days and weeks, I would like to react to what is actually meaningful. I could be reading out the tech specs to all of you guys, but I think we've already done quite a lot of that yesterday. And I also think that the actual experience of a device matters usually far more. Now, obviously, once benchmarks start coming out and similar stuff like that, important stuff, I will be covering it. Though with the A17, I will be a little careful in not overstating the importance of individual benchmarks, because as I've outlined yesterday, the chip is greatly redesigned with no apps currently designed for it specifically. The neural engine is twice as fast, and while the GPU is only 20% faster, it is 4 times faster than software-based ray tracing is on the A16 chip. There's also more RAM, so maybe we'll get some nice like speed comparisons. I could be doing like even some myself versus the 13 Pro Max, hopefully in a week if I get my 15 Pro Max right away. So we now have already a few people watching, which I really am grateful for. We now hit 178 subscribers. Oh my god, I forgot to update Patreon once again. I'm so fucking stupid when it comes to that. Regardless, you can follow me on Twitter. You can support me on Patreon if you want to, but just watching the videos, commenting, liking, sharing, and of course subscribing helps us the channel a lot. So thank you very much for that. Without further ado, let's get started. So our first video is MKBHD, a hands-on video, and as always, please let me know if the audio quality is good for you, like the mix between my audio and his audio, and beyond that, just, you know, like basic quality stuff. If my stream starts hicking up in any way, please let me know. Also, if you want to be an asshole, I have apparently new moderation rights on YouTube, which include like 10-second bans or 24-hour bans, so I can be quite creative about that, though our last few streams have been extremely positive, and I'm very grateful for that. So, everything is tuned, and let's start it.
So today I got a hold of and got to poke around the new iPhone 15 and the iPhone 15 Pros. I do remember flying here and I'm thinking, what could Apple possibly do? Like, what could they possibly introduce with a new iPhone, the 23rd iPhone?
Like, is that a joke? Like, this is how far I watched the video, by the way. This is why I decided to do like reacts in general. Like, this is not the 23rd iPhone. Is he saying that because of the year 2023? like we definitely did not have 23 generations of iPhone, right? The iPhone started in 2007. But also when you look at individual models, we also didn't have 23 iPhones. The first iPhone, the iPhone 2G so to speak, then the 3G, the 3GS, the 4, the 4S, the 5, the 5S, the 6, the 5S and the 5C, the 6, the 6 Plus, the 6S, the 6S Plus, the SE, and then let's just go through SE2 and SE3, right? And then, so we are now at 15, so 7, 7 Plus, 8, 8 Plus, 10, now we are at 20, 10S, 10S Max, 10R. Now we already are at over 23, and then once you get into further ones like 11, 11 Pro, 11 Pro Max, 12, 12 Mini, 12 Pro, 12 Pro Max, right? The list goes on and on. Like, I have no idea what this comment means. Like, is there like a way to abstract? Like, does he count the pros and the non-pros as one model each? So this was one thing that already confused me. Maybe it's a joke, maybe it's the iPhone Gen for 2023 that he was supposed to say, and he's kind of like jet lagged after everything, but yeah, that was a little confusing to me.
That's actually interesting. Now, there is more stuff than just the iPhone that was mentioned at this Wonderlust event that Apple hosted, including some stuff that's straight.
Also, the name is stupid in retrospect. Like, there's nothing wonderlusty about the iPhone 15, 15 Pro, the Apple Watch Series 9, the Apple Watch Ultra 2. Like, it really feels completely random. I understand maybe it has like the German word, not the actual translation, but the actual German word that people sometimes use is Wanderlust, which is basically a desire to roam around, to go on a hike and stuff like that. Maybe that would be like referencing like their bigger environmental push. But that's like really a stretch. Obviously, most people don't speak German, so, and most people, even in Germany, who I've talked to, have not made this association whatsoever. So that really sounds confusing to me. This really feels like a marketing misfire in terms of the naming. I don't think it ultimately matters, because what gets marketed is the device, not the actual event. But that to me was a little weird.
Up wasn't mentioned on stage at all, so we'll get to that. But this is just the new iPhone stuff, so stay tuned to get subscribed to see the rest. But let's just talk about the new iPhone 15 and 15 Pro. So here's a lens to look at all this stuff through. Coming into this, basically everything Apple just added to their newest flagship phones falls into two buckets. It's either something we've already seen in some other phone for years, or it's some ecosystem feature that only works with other iPhones.
I mean, you could say that, but then again, like, it's like technically, if we want to reduce it to just the tech spec behind it, but like the way Apple handles portraits, I know it has been like done years ago on like the old giant camera Nokias and stuff like that, but I feel like the actual experience behind like the fact that everything happens automatically, intuitively. I know this is always like the argument behind like Apple not being first but doing it right. But my question here is, at what point do you do something so differently by doing it right that like the old stuff becomes pretty irrelevant in comparison, right? Don't get me wrong, I understand that even something like that portrait like feature, change the foreground, change the background, choose a different subject, though a different subject is kind of unique in the way Apple is handling it. There's a lot here that I don't think is like really that comparable. Like, of course USB-C existed on other phones, of course higher than 3x zoom existed on other phones, but there are different approaches to multiple of those things that Apple is taking, including like the periscope zoom camera. A lot of people like naively like compare just like, oh, 5x to 10x. Well, first off, it depends on what you actually compare the zoom from. Like the iPhone zoom is 120 millimeter, the Galaxy S24 Ultra is 230 millimeters, so it's not exactly 2x, so from 5x to 10x. It's just that the 10x compares to a slightly different millimeter rating on the main camera on the S24 Ultra. That's just a small difference. That doesn't really matter, I understand. What matters though is the iPhone zoom camera has instead of 10 megapixels 12 megapixels. It is each individual pixel is also larger, and the aperture of Apple's periscope zoom, though it's tetra prism, it's not the exact same architecture whatsoever, probably because it's patented by Samsung. That's the point where you get to like, oh, those cameras will behave very, very differently. Like, sure, one zooms out further by default, but to anybody who has tested the S24 Ultra, like, that zoom camera is useless in low light scenarios because of the smaller sensor, the small aperture and stuff like that, which is fine if you really want to have like maybe some wildlife photography at 10x, maybe some vista shots that where you like take a beautiful panorama, see something very far away, it's a bright day, and my god, my head looks so square, I'm so sorry, that's how it looks after a shower with the new haircut. So again, like, different spec points, right? And obviously not something that Apple is first to the market in any way. It's just that there will be so much difference, and why reduce it to like, oh, it's been on Android? Like, I don't talk, like, I sometimes ironically like call out, for example, like Google's last I/O. Whenever they talked about privacy or security features, it sounded like one-to-one copies, or was it the second to last Google I/O? It doesn't matter, right? And when we talk even about like Samsung for now has like technically worse screens than Apple does, even though they're manufactured by Samsung, because Samsung Display is pretty independent sort of, and Apple pays them a ton of money, plus Apple develops their own panel tech in a lot of ways. So again, we can argue like who was first, who was second. I think with how mature technology has become, it kind of doesn't matter in some way, shape or form, due to how large the smartphone market is at this point. Everybody has already tried out, like, because of how many players there are, somebody has already tried out pretty much anything. So again, it's the same thing with like the iPhone 5s, right? It technically wasn't the first phone with a fingerprint sensor, but it was the first phone where it was actually usable. And it technically, like, well, I think it actually was the first phone with like a 64-bit chip. But how much does that spec actually matter to an end user? Like, it's just a faster chip, and that's really great, and it's faster for gaming and everything else like that. But does the end user actually care about it being 64-bit versus 32-bit, until at least apps that are 32 bits stop working with iOS 11? So again, I usually don't like this focus on like, oh, it's been this and there. Talk about how it actually is implemented. Because imagine if we talk this way about art, right? It's like, oh, somebody has already drawn this, or somebody has already used those colors. It's like, I know it's not a perfect comparison, but it's kind of similarly meaningless in the grand scheme of things.
Which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just a lens to look through this stuff at, just to keep an eye on it. So this is the iPhone 15. There's the same two sizes again, iPhone 15 and iPhone 15 Plus. And yeah, you know, there's some small changes, like the slight soft corner
the colors
radii
are
on
too
the aluminum
muted.
rails, and the one-piece glass back fading between a lighter and darker version of the same color, like this new pink one. It's pretty seamless. Also, satin soft touch backs across the whole lineup instead of glossy. I definitely like that. But the big headlining feature, really, is it's USB now. Lightning is officially...
I don't agree with that. Like, I understand USB is what matters to, like, I've seen like a ton of like during my workout, like, we have news running in the background, and like every fucking news site, like totally like mainstream Western news sites, were talking about the iPhone switching to USB-C. Like, I was like, what? Like, come on. And I understand that it's actually a headline, but I don't think it's actually that way in the eyes of consumers. I think consumers will be like, probably that's the feature where they spend like the most amount of time on to make sure that what they have works, right? Do I have the right cable? Do I have the right charger? Especially if you buy through an Apple store, that will be very, very easily solved for you. You will get great service. But I don't actually think that for most people it matters that much. Also, like, USB-C looks thick in comparison to Lightning. Just wanted to call that out. I weep for the alternative future we didn't get, where Lightning became the standard, because Apple did what Tesla is wisely doing with their NACS port, which is make it open, give it to other consumers, and then just make sure that you have your own great ecosystem, basically. And for them it's superchargers, for Apple it would be like made for I in terms of like USB things. I loved Lightning as a design. It's a shame it didn't get properly evolved. It's a shame it didn't become open source. Apple screwed up on that one. By the way, some people say that like Lightning in of itself is a problem. I 100% disagree with that. Like, Lightning predates USB-C by several years. Lightning by itself is not technologically that limited. We have had 5 gigabits per second Lightning on the 2015 iPad Pro, which was the same year when the 12-inch MacBook came out, and it had what? A 5 gigabits per second USB-C port. Yeah, sure, Lightning didn't get Thunderbolt capabilities, and it was never updated to like support like 240 watt charging or anything, but those are all things that Apple could have given it. Like, USB-C didn't launch with all the capabilities that it has. We just had Thunderbolt 5 announced as an official standard. I don't think like Lightning technically has like fewer pins, right, than USB-C, but I highly doubt that Lightning, through like the use of PCIe 4 especially now inside devices, potentially like PCIe 5, like I don't know what exactly is in the A17, right? They could just use like only 2 lanes of PCIe 5 basically inside the device, but yeah, like, I think that Lightning had potential, and that's where the screw up was. Lightning in of itself, it predates USB-C. It was far better than micro USB. Like, the micro USB is the reason why I cannot move around my microphone. It's because it has a micro USB port, and I have a small adapter so I can plug in a USB-C cable into it. A Type-C to Type-C cable. I don't have any micro USB to Type-C cable. And that adapter is basically broken because micro USB sucks. Thankfully, the actual port works, but if I were to move around my microphone too much, that adapter would fall out and I would lose microphone capability. That never would happen with Lightning unless you literally had like a broken port. So yeah, and that is extremely rare.
Dead. These new iPhones are all USB-C across the board. Now, on one hand, this is a huge deal. Like, there's only ever been one port change in the iPhone ever. Back in 2012, we went from that 30-pin connector thing to this new Lightning thing, which we've had ever since. And now the second one ever is USB Type-C. But on the other hand, it's just USB. Like, it's the same port all these other laptops and tablets all over the planet have had for the past couple years.
That's the right attitude.
I imagine it might be another year or two before.
That's exactly why I'm saying it's not the headline feature, because it is so ubiquitous already. It will not create the same problems for people as Lightning did back in the day. And even then, I also think people wildly overstate what a problem Lightning was. Like, you got, especially at that point where you also got like power adapters still in the box, the cables, so it was USB 2 in the same way that 30-pin was, so I don't really see a problem here.
The whole lineup, like the baseline cheap iPad and the iPhone SE and everything else, gets USB-C. But yeah, I don't know. We knew it was coming, but it's still kind of surreal to look at an iPhone and see a USB port on it. So what does this enable? It's the real question, right? First of all, it's the one cable that you can ideally use to charge all your stuff. So your Mac, your iPad, your iPhone, your friend's Android phone, the new AirPods, which just got a new USB-C case, all that stuff, one cable. Oh, and now you can charge accessories like the new AirPods with the wire. So there's no wireless reverse charging right now, but that C2C cable that comes in the box, you can like plug it into the iPhone, plug it into the AirPods, and charge the AirPods up.
As a small detail, of course, we do know that Apple like relies on USB 2 speed still when it comes to their included cables, but also with the cable that they're selling from the Apple Store, unless you get Thunderbolt. So there's no USB 3 cable that is designed just for like the iPhone 15 Pro. So that's quite interesting, which it also, I mean, it would also work like well with the iPad Air and stuff like that. But Apple apparently thinks if you want faster, you should probably get Thunderbolt. Though, interestingly enough, the cable does support 240 watts. Now, 240 watts is not that uncommon anymore. I know that like the latest Anchor cables support 240 watts. However, some cables can really be hit and miss when it comes to actually hitting that full speed. Like in tests, there are pretty much no devices with that power delivery standard. I do kind of trust Apple a lot when it comes to that. So I currently am not going to buy any extra cables thus far. Probably I will wait to find something really good with USB 3. I kind of don't want to spend over $100 on a Thunderbolt cable because I'm not buying it with 1 meter length. That just is pointless. So I'll try to find something that is like just a solution for basically connecting my upcoming iPhone with my MacBook and then just having full quality video data transfer to my Mac at 10 gigabits. I don't really need Thunderbolt for anything else. I apologize.
From the iPhone battery. So that's pretty cool. But they did hold back on one very key thing, and they saved it for the iPhone 15 Pro. So I'll get to that in a bit, but that's USB-C.
Yeah,
Aside
I
from
wouldn't need to comment
really,
on
it's
that
a
that much
slightly
with how much
updated
I've
phone.
already
It's a little
spoken
bit of a new
about
display.
speeds.
You know, you get the dynamic island here, of course, on these baseline iPhones, and there's also now a higher peak brightness, 2000 nits now, which is twice as bright as the iPhone 14s. And there's a new camera. The primary camera is now a 48 megapixel chip, presumably the same one that was in the iPhone 14.
This is so... Wait. A 48 megapixel chip, he means sensor. It's not the same one. It is smaller. It has 2 micron pixels once you accumulate the pixels. It is a slightly smaller sensor. What it does have is it has a larger aperture, f1.6 versus f1.8. So it does let more light. So in the end, my theory was that because Apple is using this kind of new stacked sensor, they're actually capable of redesigning the actual like lens setup. Obviously, I'm not an expert here, but which allows them to give you a wider aperture. And with that, they can use a slightly smaller sensor, but with the wider aperture, it achieve pretty similar low light results. I'm actually very curious if there will be some scenarios where the 15 and 15 Plus might have ever so slightly better low light scenarios thanks to that new sensor, because even though it's smaller, it is somewhat newer, apparently. That's cute. But then also with the wider aperture, how that all comes together. So yeah, it remains interesting. I think the testing for this year's devices is actually more interesting than last year. If anything, though, I would say that even though the iPhone 15 got more updates this year than the 14 did versus the 13, I'm kind of, though, inclined to say that I think this year the Pros have never been a more slam dunk choice than this year. Like, when you think about, like, the iPhone 12, like, it was lighter than the 12 Pro. The smaller 12 Pro did not have the largest sensor that was on the 12 Pro Max. Like, there was no better battery life on the non-Pro. So what you wanted with the you also had like the 12 mini as an option, which now you don't have. So really, if you got the 12, I really recommended getting either the 12 Pro Max or the regular 12, or maybe if you can deal with pretty low battery life, the 12 mini. Then with the 13th generation, I recommended the Pros because of ProMotion, or I recommended the 13 mini because it's actually a good compact device with decent battery life. With the 14 generation, I pretty much recommended across the board already the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max, though if you really wanted to save a little bit on weight and some money and you didn't really care about like the latest specs, I still could recommend you getting the iPhone 14. Now sure, that price difference is still here, but the weight difference isn't. And while the camera difference is now technically smaller, you also now have more interesting spec points, I would say. Like the A17 is better versus the A16 than the A16 was versus a 5-core GPU A15. USB-C 3 is more versus USB 2 is more interesting than Lightning with USB 2 speeds versus Lightning with USB 2 speeds. You know what I'm saying? Wi-Fi 6E versus Wi-Fi 6, while on the previous generation it was Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6. So the Pros, while they might not have like a giant resolution advantage for their main camera anymore, they might not have the same brightness advantage as they had last generation, they still have the ProMotion advantage. They now don't stink when it comes to weight, which could be an issue for some people. The Pro Max has now probably like really great zoom camera, which you probably don't even need like 3x zoom that much anymore now that you have a really good 48 megapixel shooter. So you really want to have like further out zoom. Again, I have advocated and will keep on advocating for 4x or variable zoom, but I think we'll have to wait for variable zoom, and 4x is too similar to 3x to really advertise it. Some people have been like complaining, why isn't this like 6 or 7x? I don't get that whatsoever. Like, what do you photograph that is that far away? Like, to me, 5x is already like, oh, will that crop in too much and what I want to photograph? And they're like, no, I want to crop in further. I'm like, what? But we'll get to that, I think, in some other videos.
Pro last year, and all the benefits that come with that. And then the rest of the phone really follows that same formula. They do this thing where the new baseline phone is basically last year's Pro phone repackaged. So it inherits the same A6.
Yeah, without some Pro features, right? So no ProMotion, no ProRAW or ProRes, even though it's the same A16 as in the Pro. And don't get me started by tell me that you need like the exact same 48 megapixel for a sensor for that. You don't. The 13 Pro already had those features, and it's way less powerful and capable now than the base 15 and 15 Plus, except for having ProMotion because it's a Pro, right? Now I do get why it's not ProMotion, though I am very impressed by the brightness they got out of an LTPS panel. It's not LTPO, so getting up to 2000 nits is actually quite impressive. But again, not even 90 Hertz, that kind of sucks.
16 Bionic chip from last year's Pro phone. The coolest feature of this phone though, and you know it's also in the Pro phone, but I still think it's pretty solid, is the camera has this new next generation portrait mode. But basically
also, by the way, next gen portraits, really positive thing. Apple has not short shafted the 14 Pro whatsoever. I actually think the 14 Pro is one of the most updated phones in terms of like, oh, a new phone comes out and then do we port some of the features to it? Apparently those kinds of portrait are coming to the 14 Pro. So Apple really seems to have optimized it for the A16 and the A17, and because the sensor in the 14 Pro was already so good, they can get away with giving it that new feature. That's really great. In prior years you could always ask like, why are some features limited? Now some features are limited, similar how Nvidia Quadro GPUs like get like better software support and different drivers technically, right? but they are the same silicon, right? So that's how ProRes, ProRAW are limited, even though the chip would be capable of it. But it seems like features that Apple doesn't want to advertise as pro, like that better portrait mode, they do actually port to the last generation. Now it's only to the last generation pros, but that to me makes sense. Optimize the algorithm for the A16, optimize it for 48 megapixel large sensor, stuff like that. I'm completely fine with that. I think that's really good thing in general. I would also like for Apple to port back ProRes and ProRAW to non-pro devices that have chips with appropriate power and RAM. This is, for example, what differentiated like the 13th gen, right? The 13 had like the 13th gen had like A15 chips across the board, and the Pros had only one core more. So that's technically not like a difference in encoding or decoding capability. But what the 13 and 13 Plus and 13 Mini did not have was 6 gigs of RAM. So maybe that explains some of the difference, especially in like ProRes capabilities, though I would argue it shouldn't be really a limit for ProRAW. So yeah, I've just thrown around a lot of words. It still was cohesive though, so maybe if you want to listen to it at half speed and analyze what I just said, because it can be really confusing, you can do so afterwards, of course.
Automatically detects when there's a subject in a photo and captures all of the depth information needed to be able to turn it into a portrait mode photo later. So you don't have to remember to switch it to portrait mode.
Also, we have 6 people watching. Please, as always, let me know. Is the audio good? I assume that if you are still actually here with us watching, that it's all right. But please, I am pretty worried after like the last day and even before this experimenting with OBS. It really was a mess. So, but yeah, audio is not an issue, but and the stream seems to be working fine. Just let me know if like my audio mix is basically okay for you.
Necessarily every time, and if you ever forget but want to add that blur later, you can do it with high quality results. So that's cool. Aside from that, the rest of the phone, I mean, it's the same thing, right? Same sizes, guys, same ceramic shield, same dust and water resistance, and same starting prices. $799 for the 15 and $899 for the 15 Plus. So then there is the Pro phones, the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. There is
I wonder what happens with storage next generation. Like, I mean, Apple could potentially then do a price increase on the regular Pro, right, and give it 256 gig standards. What Apple could also do would be like potentially like give the Pro like also like 256, but without a price increase, just to keep the $999 starting price. That would be pretty impressive. I don't think the entire lineup would be updated, just because not all Pros already have 256 gigs. So I am curious about it. Now, storage is dirt cheap at the moment. But again, Apple has never been like the one to like give us a ton of value and reduce their profit margins. They've already like shown themselves pretty adaptable in like when it comes to currency fluctuations, right? First, some bad news: the prices in like China, Japan, and India have gone up because the currencies have gone down since last year. However, prices in the European Union and Great Britain have gone down, actually quite significantly so, because those currencies have regained some ground over the US dollar. In fact, I'm actually now quite optimistic. What if the euro like regains another 10% versus the dollar up until next year? Will Apple give me that value right back as they're doing right now? I'm kind of hoping they will.
more new here. A lot of it I'm actually gonna want to test just to see if it's actually what they say, but make sure you get subscribed to see those full reviews when they come out later this month, and we can figure out if the phones are worth it. But basically, it's not bleeding edge stuff that we've never seen before. It's just welcome stuff, and those are mostly in build quality, the chip inside, and the cameras. So let's just start with the chip inside. First of all, it's a brand new chip that's called the A17 Pro. It's the first time they've used the word Pro.
I think the interesting thing about the A17 Pro naming could it be that Apple plans on like, I think the easiest thing to imagine is that they will use the A17 next year in the next iPhone, and it will probably still be the 6-core version, right? But what happens if they use like the A17 in a potential SE at some point, or in an iPad mini, right, or an 11th gen iPad or 12th gen iPad, whenever that one gets an A17, right? I assume those would be like maybe slightly binned 5-core GPU versions, and maybe they could come with like 6 gigs of RAM instead of the 8 gigs of RAM that are in the A17 Pro currently on the iPhones Pro. Obviously, RAM is pretty modular in how much RAM you want to put in a device. Yeah, so I don't think that, like, Apple, of course, you could also make the point that Apple would like put the A17 into next year's non-Pro iPhones, and then it wouldn't support like again ProRes, ProRAW, but yeah, like, I don't think that Apple's Pro naming is that precise when it comes to features, because ProMotion will be coming to the base iPhone in 2 years as well, and I doubt that Apple would want to not use ProMotion as a marketing point, because ProMotion is a pretty well received feature. That's why people always complain that it's not on the base models.
In an iPhone chip, and it's their first 3nm chip, so it promises some performance and efficiency improvements as a result. I think they said it's like 10% faster, high performance cores, and the neural engine's up to twice as fast, a bunch of other stuff. Not sure how much of this you'll actually notice in everyday use, but hey, future-proofing and headroom is never a bad thing, so this is clearly a powerful chip.
And 8 gigs of RAM will also go a long way to help out with some future-proofing. As I've said before in my actual reaction video to the stream, to the event stream, I do think that the performance increases have come a little short of what I expected. To be more precise, I expected 15% faster CPU performance and 30% faster GPU performance, and what we got instead was 10% faster CPU performance and 20% faster GPU performance. So that's a third off from what I expected. However, Apple's increase in neural engine capability far outpaces what I expected. I expected around a 50% increase, because I knew, of course, that this year they would really want to focus on AI. So that's really cool. And their ray tracing capabilities, again, I have speculated about those, but the way they have actually shown it to work looks really impressive, and I think next year will be even more impressive once they also give like the chip like potentially like LPDDR5X or LPDDR5T, I believe it's called. So really fast, like over 8,000, maybe even over 9,000 mega transfers per second memory versus 6,400 currently. So that will be really interesting how that affects performance, even though I don't expect the A18 to be actually that much better, because N3B is not technically worse than N3E, it's just different, right? It's built different.
They showed a demo of a game with like faster ray tracing, which isn't new, but you know, it helped make their point. But
he's like, what is that perspective? Like, we have ray tracing inside the chips in Qualcomm processors, right? But we don't actually have real games, certainly nothing AAA, that is coming out with support for ray tracing. Now, I don't know like if Resident Evil 4 Village, Assassin's Creed Mirage, by the way, I'm buying Assassin's Creed Mirage now on my iPhone to test it out, to see how it scales to the iPad, and hopefully it's also like a universal purchase with the macOS version. But regardless, like having ray tracing in any kind of big game, from what I understand, like Honkai Star Rail and or Genshin Impact, those games look pretty identical to me whenever I look at them, are getting like ray tracing baked into their water reflections. Like the way he's putting it sounds like Android's phones have had ray tracing games for years and have outpaced iPhones. Does he mean it's been available in like PC GPUs and consoles? Because like brother, that's not how you compare technology whatsoever.
Interesting thing to note,
but as far as I understand, he's not a big gamer.
Here with this chip is they mentioned the chip has a new USB 3 controller on it.
Oh, that's such a weird point to focus on. I would mention like the AV1 encoding before I would mention like the USB 3 thing. By the way, I'm not even sure if it's probably directly on the chip. It might be that the chip itself just has like because you can put like USB control chips obviously outside the main chip on the logic board. That happens. That's how most motherboards work. They just then rely on obviously the signaling from the main CPU and stuff like that if you build a PC. But here, like, I assume that almost by default A17 probably comes with more bandwidth, right? Like more PCIe lanes, and they like dedicate one lane or something, right? You don't need that much more if it's PCIe 4 based for this. Again, I cannot guarantee it. I would actually love to see some AnandTech breakdowns on it, maybe some die shot analysis actually, and some logic board analysis as well, obviously, to make sure that, because we've seen like an extra chip next to where the actual USB port is. So Apple sometimes draws stuff on their like die diagrams when you actually see them, like what he just showed, right? They sometimes draw stuff on it that's technically not actually on the die, but that is communicating with something on the die, because the die obviously itself has like USB controller elements. So yeah, it's not a guarantee that in any device where you put like A17, you automatically would get also like USB 3 speeds.
Which means the 15 and 15 Plus don't have that. So basically that means the Pro iPhone's USB-C port actually gets upgraded USB 3 speeds, the faster data transfer speeds, up to 10 gigabits per second. But the base iPhones without that controller, they get USB-C, but they're going to be stuck at USB 2.0 speeds. Basically the same we've always had with Lightning, like 480 megabits per second. Now this probably won't make a real difference to most people. Like, I don't know when the last time you plugged your phone in was, but it's kind of a bummer that not all of the benefits of USB-C come to all of the phones.
Those are not core benefits of USB-C. USB-C for years on Android, and to a degree still on cheaper devices, is 2.0. Even something like OnePlus for years have had like 2.0 transfer speeds, despite like having like their ridiculous focus on super fast charging and stuff like that. USB 2.0 is not as ridiculous as you might think. In fact, when you actually go on the larger market and look at cables that are like around $10, $15, $20, which is probably the price range where most people even buy braided cables, unless you buy like 3-meter cables, right? Like 9-feet cables and something like that, and it's probably a little more. Those cables are, the vast majority is USB 2. In fact, I looked already at some of the major like accessory makers that I know and somewhat trust, you could say. I have not found like anything that even mentions transfer speed specifications right on the website, right? You have to go through some weird workarounds to actually find that data. That to me is pretty hilarious, pretty anti-consumer, and it is being called out when Apple does it. But the fact that from Anker, Aukey, Nomad, all those companies who make accessories, that they've been doing this for years, and that even Samsung with their $1,800 Galaxy Fold 5 ships you a USB 2 cable, apparently is not worth mentioning. But once Apple doesn't do it, again, it's a double standard. I myself, I have said before, I actually care about braided probably the most out of any cable spec. I would like USB 3, and I definitely think it's worth including, but don't get me started on like Apple is uniquely evil in terms of that. Apple does prioritize higher margins, and Apple is the first one to like cheap out, so to speak, on how many accessories they ship with a phone, right? Though it does also have environmental reasons. or what exact accessories they ship, though by now they don't pretty much ship anything with it. So at this point I probably would prefer Apple not ship any cable whatsoever and just sell you a USB 3 cable or a Thunderbolt cable. I think that would be far less confusing, and then individual countries could still force Apple to include cables, like France or Brazil, right? They have like stronger regulations and stuff like that. So yeah, again, it is what it is. I just wanted to say Apple definitely is not uniquely evil here or uniquely even confusing, because get yourself a Galaxy Z Fold 5 and you'll see.
But for the Pro phones that are going to be shooting more ProRes video or Pro RAW photos, I mean, it takes forever. If you've shot this stuff like I have, you know it takes forever to get those off of the phone because they're big files. So I kind of wish they'd gone all the way. I wish they'd done Thunderbolt speeds 20, 30, 40 gigabits per second. But yeah, it's just going to be USB 3 on the Pro iPhones and USB 2 on the base iPhones. You know what is disappointing though? No fast charging. Like this, I talked about this on the podcast on Waveform. I'll try to link the episode below, but like switching to USB-C, you'd think, oh, this is a huge opportunity for Apple to like explain why they're doing it, and we know why they're doing it, but oh, why are you giving us this new port and all this big new USB-C deal? And it's just the same 20 or so watt charging we've had for the iPhone for forever. No new fast charging. Kind of figured they would try to do that better, but yeah, this will still take an hour and a half, 2 hours to charge. But anyway.
Yeah, I don't have the slightest problem with that. I am a little weirded out by the specs, the way Apple actually outlines it on their website, because they mention like a 35-minute charge up to 50% with a 20-watt charger or higher. Though Apple did already support higher than 20-watt charging last year, up to 27 watts. Now, maybe like the equilibrium, right? The point of like diminishing returns where Apple has to throttle down charging speeds for thermals and stuff like that comes so fast that there is no big difference between the 20 and the 27 watt and like a 30-watt charger that gives you 27 watts. So that's a little confusing to me. I've said before, the reason why I was looking forward to maybe 35 watts was because of the rumor that the iPhone could have like 5,000 milliampere hour speeds. This is not happening, unfortunately, which means that it does not need actually that much faster charging. I'm perfectly fine with the charging speed of my 13 Pro Max. What the iPhones do have, and I believe it's not hardware limited to this, it's just a software feature, is you can now limit to what percentage you charge your phone. Maybe it's limited, I'll probably look it up later on, but that's a cool feature. I like it from electric vehicles. It's great. I would probably charge my phone every night to 90%. 80% for me is not enough. 100% is not something I always want to do for battery health reasons. So if I can run my device between like 90 and 20% with that every day, that to me is really great. And on very intensive days, I could run it down to basically zero, to a point where 80% of the charge would not be enough. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm.
The new design is what most people are fawning over at the moment with the Pros, so they have switched the rails from that shiny fingerprinty stainless steel to this new grade 5 titanium alloy with a brushed texture. And it's nice. It is, first of all, it's noticeably lighter in the hand, which I love, and it seems like it's also enabled them to shrink the body of the Pro iPhones just a little bit, so they have the same screen size.
No. Like, what the fuck is MKBHD smoking? He probably does not follow rumors, right? The iPhone is utilizing the same bezel shrinking technology that they've pioneered in the Apple Watch Series 7. Like, it's a specific thing that has to do with the actual panel being used, though it does not necessitate like a panel that would also be like a next generation LTPO panel. It has more to do with how it integrates into device chassis. The titanium itself is not paramount to reducing the bezel size of the display, not whatsoever.
But the screens now get even closer to the edges, and there's even thinner slightly thinner bezels, and I actually do notice that. Now, a lot of people are also quoting stronger as one of the benefits too, but I really don't think this is going to make as much of a difference as people are thinking. Like, the Pro iPhones have had this stainless steel rails for a while now. I've dropped this phone, as you know, I don't have a case, on the ground. I've dented the stainless steel rails. It's fine. It doesn't break. It's not the stainless steel that breaks. It's the glass that breaks. And as far as we can tell, it's the same ceramic shield glass on the iPhone 15 Pro. That hasn't changed. So if you drop it on the glass, you're still going to have not great results. But yeah, technically, sure, titanium is stronger. Either way, the new colors are black, white, and this new blue, which is really subtle, and then natural, which I guess it kind of embraces the raw.
The colors are gorgeous. I don't have that much more to contribute here, especially since it's also going to make the video quite long if I pause it as much with the upcoming other videos. But yeah, it is cool. I like the colors. I know I shit on the colors for the 15 and 15 Plus. They're way too muted. I think the Pros work beautifully. I kind of would be interested what a gold could potentially look like. If they manage to make the titanium look really good in gold, I think they could get rid of, like, maybe which one, or just make it a 5-color lineup. Why not? Get rid of one storage version again. Get rid of 256. Just make it 512 and 2 terabytes.
Titanium feel reminds me of Starlight, if you're curious. Kind of like this warm tone. Weirdly, I think
that's
I
how
like
it got
the most.
through
but
the
also
website.
Something else Apple said on stage, and this is pretty quick, so you might not have even picked it up, but they did mention that they have redesigned a bit of the interior of the chassis to make the back glass more replaceable. So
it's not just the back glass itself. In fact, what happens now is you can pretty much open the phone through the back, which makes obviously back glass repairs cheaper and easier. And second of all, it allows the battery to be much easier, to make it much more easier to reach. While current iPhone Pro design favored front glass replacements, you have to choose, right? Usually, from which side do you make your device openable, so to speak, right? The front or the back? That probably works out the wrong way, the way I'm showing with the camera mirror flip, right? But front and back, right? And if you make it from the front, that's usually what you do in order to make front screen repairs much easier. But then that makes access to components like the battery more difficult. Now, if you prioritize back repairs, that's what you would usually do to prioritize battery repairs. Obviously, the back glass as well, but then again, you can run around with a broken back glass. With a broken front screen, it's a little different. And Apple has for years favored a front open design. Like all phones choose, by the way. Like, unless you're like the Fair phone and you're basically like openable by people just looking at you because you're so repairable. But the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus, so I actually think that Apple pioneers some interesting technologies on their non-Pro devices. It's actually quite fascinating, like the new chassis design that is openable from both the front and the back. Now I'm doing it this way and not this way, apparently. That came with the 14 and 14 Plus, and now it's coming to the entire 15th generation. The 15 and 15 Plus come with the new stacked sensors, which also allow for like a slightly different like a lens arrangement in the same thickness apparently, and that same thing will be coming to the entire 16th generation. So it's pretty interesting that apparently Apple has like teams really trying to like, I don't think that they have different teams, right, for the 15 Plus and 15 versus 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max, but what I do believe is that the fact that not everything gets changed basically in the Plus phone, in the non-Pro phones, opens them up to be sometimes creative with one thing each generation, that they could then like run to Tim and say like, can we put that on the on the Pros now as well? It works so good. It helps us with repairs. It helps us with like open stuff. Yeah, so we do usually have trickle down features from the Pros, but we also have features that climb up, which is quite cool.
More repairable iPhone design. Technically, it's a small thing. It's just one little step, but it's a step in the right direction for a more repairable iPhone. But my favorite feature, and before we get to any of the cameras, I honestly think this is my favorite feature, is the new action button. A new customizable...
It's my favorite feature as well, actually. I've seen complaints that it apparently currently only supports one press. Apparently the way it's... I don't know if it has anything to do with that it's so small. Apple does not treat it as like a click. Apple treats it like a press, right? So it waits for like half a second before it actually goes through with the task at hand that you configured to the action button. And of course you can configure it with flash, camera, everything else like that. But beyond that, what's also interesting is, or just beautiful you could say, is how it works so fine with the dynamic island. Like, I know people wanted like new dynamic island animations and stuff like that, and just the fact that you press a button and your dynamic island responds, I think this will actually put a lot of people who are hardcore enthusiasts over the edge, though those people probably were going to buy the iPhone 15 Pro anyway.
Button on the side of the iPhone. Just the Pro iPhones, so it replaces the mute switch, which is...
Yeah, and this feature will trickle down to the regulars. Dimiki, I don't think I've seen you yet in the chat. Hi. Always glad to see new viewers.
Yeah, iconic, but it's in the same spot as the mute switch, and it's actually customizable. So it's a pretty small button, basically about the same size as the switch, and by default, it actually behaves just like the mute switch did. So you actually hold it down to switch between muted or ringer on. Great. But if you dive into the settings, there's actually a section for this action button, and it's actually really in-depth and super solid. It basically lets you go through and pick the function of the button.
Oh yeah, I really wanted to react. Look how gorgeous
you can keep the mute switch
the
on,
settings page is.
You can have it switch you in and out of a certain focus mode, like Do Not Disturb, or you could pick whichever other one you want. You could also have it auto-launch the camera and pick whichever camera mode it opens.
That's really cool. If you're like a really really hardcore into videography, or if you really like to take selfies, the fact that this is doing this for you, right? If you know that, 90% of the time the way I want to quick access the camera is for stuff that for selfies, right? You're an Instagram influencer or something like that. Well, guess what? That works, and I think this phone will be huge for stuff like that, especially if Smart HDR5 is as good as they're saying. That's a big thing. Also, with how much they're covering, I actually don't think that with 3 videos we actually need to go through tech specs anymore, because this video is then going to be like 4 hours long or something.
You could also do flashlight turning on or opening up voice memos, or it can toggle the magnifier. Or the last option actually is you can have it trigger a Siri shortcut, which, as you know, can technically do almost anything, including basically launching any app on your phone.
And this is how I think it puts it ahead of most other Android phones in terms of customization. I do fully understand that Androids have like customization for like the volume buttons or the power button, where you could technically configure it to some quick access stuff. I understand Androids do have an alternative for Apple shortcuts. I'm not naive. I'm not trapped in the ecosystem. I know that alternatives exist and they can work quite well. But the way this is integrated, like, guys, please look at like videos from like famous developers and like genius engineers. Like, there's a reason why those people still use iPhones and Apple Watches. It's because when it comes to a hyper-personal device like a smartphone, they usually don't want to fuss around with it a lot. And with how much customization Apple now enables, by the way, something like the focus modes are not matched at all by Android, the way Apple has set it up. And when you combine that with all the further like customizations that now exist through something like the action button, and with how much developers have chosen to adopt shortcuts. Like, to me, one of the coolest things was, and I am praising Tesla quite a bit in this video, even though I'm not the biggest fan, but like they recently integrated shortcuts they integrated with shortcuts basically, which is really cool, because now you can like potentially you could customize a ton of car stuff now with the action button if you really wanted to. I do think it would be a little bit of a waste, but it would still be cool.
I think there may be a bit of a delay from the button press to the app opening, if I'm thinking about this correctly.
Yeah, shortcuts usually have a small delay, though I do assume that given that the press itself has maybe a small delay, maybe Apple could program it for it to like automatically already start the shortcut, so those delays would be overlapping. Again, it depends on how Apple particularly integrates it.
Like it's done in the past, but I'll have to test that for the full review. But
yeah, by the way, the camera launched really quickly. I really like that, and this is how I'm going to be using it.
Theoretically, you can map this button to open whatever, your calendar app, your to-do list app, whatever app you want.
Not just your
totally
calendar app,
but
even like a specific like calendar portion or something.
But now you can. But then last but
With
not
shortcuts?
least, the new cameras across the board here. There's a new larger 48 megapixel main sensor for the pros.
There's not. Like, does he mean like versus the 15 and 15 Plus? Because it's not larger than the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max. I think the way he like very quickly provides information in this video is probably the worst I've ever seen from him. I mean, it's not egregious because I do understand the problems with being like having to fly to Apple and going through all that jazz, but he's probably really tired, but it's not up to his usual standards.
Approved ultra wide, and then the Pro Max, just the Pro Max, gets a new intricate folding 5x telephoto camera. I'm guessing if I asked Apple, they would say that there was only enough room in the bigger Pro Max to fit this folding lens. I'll ask. We'll see what they say. But until then, the
Dimiki, thank for the welcome, brother. I'm watching you live from from India. Okay, I'm not going to try to pronounce either the city or the province, but a big shout out to my watchers from India who have been actually growing a little bit according to like YouTube analysis, if I'm not mistaken, which is really nice. I do have a surprising amount of Indonesian viewers, but India has been growing also as well.
regular 15 Pro is going to still have the 3x telephoto, the regular 3x from last year. And then we found this seemingly random feature. It's in the settings. They also talked about it in the key.
I do want to go back to a rumor that we've talked about, which like said that like the ultra wide and the zoom camera would have slightly larger, like actually more pixel having sensors. Apple still advertises them as 12 megapixels and with pretty much the same pixel size. So I don't actually think that is true. Maybe Apple does an ever so slight crop on like a 13 megapixel sensor, though I wouldn't know why if they could just reuse sensors from a previous generation.
Note, but where you can change your default focal length to be either 1x or 1.2x or 1.5x for some reason. So it's buried in the
the idea is about millimeter length. It's just so people really know how it compares to like a professional DSLR. It's not, or mirrorless camera for that matter. It's just designed to give you like a more professional insight into what you're actually doing. The problem with that is I actually agree with MKBHD, that's not that meaningful, because you usually associate different lens properties on a high-end camera if you like go with like a 120 millimeter versus a 24 millimeter lens system. On the iPhone you don't. It's just a digital zoom when you go from like 24 to 35 or something. So I don't really see the point. But it's just like, it just shows you, right? Also, part of that, if I may be ever so slightly pedantic, it has also to do with how the A17 handles pixel aggregation. You now don't get 12 megapixel final results, you get 24 megapixel final results. So that to me is actually interesting. Haziat, did you write something inappropriate, or why was your message like invisible on the chat? Please guys, don't write something inappropriate, I'll fucking ban you.
Middle of the camera settings, but you can tell it to default to one of these specific 3 focal lengths. So if you switch back to the camera app, that 1x button is now always going to take
like I'm just trying to think, like would Apple then give you like native 24 megapixels if you go by like 1.5 or something? It's not exact same. It's interesting. I will gonna love checking it out once I actually have the phone.
To the new focal length that you've chosen, and you can still get to 1x or whatever other focal length you want. But I just found that interesting. So maybe if you're someone that takes 1.2x photos so often that you want a button to get there as fast as possible because it's the perfect focal length for you, then sure. Maybe if you're a photographer, you don't want to do the work of digital cropping, just hit that focal length every time. Sure. But there's been a lot of comments that at the end of the day, it feels like USB is literally the biggest headlining new feature.
No, it's not. For one, to me, it's the action button because it's actually a change in user experience. A17 is a bigger deal with also with how big, like MKBHD might not be a big gamer, certainly not a smartphone gamer, but with how important smartphone gaming is in general. So yeah, there's a ton that I would put above it. Even like smaller bezels, like on the Pros, though I personally don't care about bezels that much. I think everything from the 12th generation has been pretty much how, like, to me, infinitely acceptable, right? If a phone in 20 years came out with bezels as large as on the 12, yeah, it wouldn't be the most modern looking phone, but to me it would be perfectly fine if it was still like a great phone in all other aspects, right? As long as it doesn't have the actual screen from the iPhone 12 in 20 years. So yeah, I'm not that laser focused on certain aesthetic aspects, especially since I do think that bezels, if they're slightly larger, can actually look pretty good. What I do like is because of the curved edges and stuff like that, and because titanium itself is now curved, I actually really like that transition between like the panel, the very slim bezels, like even like that small like speaker cutout, and then the titanium. I actually really like the look. I think I would actually say I like the look of the 13 Pro bezels a little more than I liked them on the 14 Pro because they were ever so slightly smaller, and I think it like clashed a little bit. Again, it's very, very minutia criticism here, but because now it's really, really thin, and because it's curved versus the hard edge of the stainless steel, I think it actually looks the best out of any iPhone ever built. In fact, out of any phone ever built.
This year's new iPhone, which is crazy. I can't quite get rid of my lightning cable yet. There's still some accessories. There's like MagSafe Duo. There's AirPods.
They discontinued MagSafe Duo. Yeah, it's a weird situation with MagSafe Duo.
Max. There's like the Magic Trackpad. There's a couple things that still.
I assume they might be waiting for like MagSafe Duo. Maybe they're still working a little bit with like Qi 2 because the iPhone support for Qi 2 is pretty weird. It's still like rated for 7.5 watts, even though Qi 2 is basically identical to MagSafe. So yeah, there are some limitations here that are very Apple-esque, I would say, but there's also the difference that Apple is very much the first one to actually claim Qi 2 support. So it's actually hard to say if they're like lazy or evil, or if they just are not fully ready yet, but by just the point because Qi 2 is pretty new, and maybe they're not quite sure how well the iPhone will work yet. Dimiki, you're saying here 15 Pro Max price is 160,000. Did you think it's really worth to buy? Well, it depends on your own finances. From what I understand, the prices have gone up in India because of currency fluctuations, which sucks because technically for Apple it should be like, well, except for the currency, right? It should be cheaper for them to make the iPhone now that they have like a logistics supply chain in India and they are making some phones there. So they're now getting like exceptions from certain regulations, certain taxes and stuff like that. Again, I cannot really speak to your personal finances. To me, I'm buying the 15 Pro Max and I'm buying it actually in 1 terabyte. Just for some consideration, I bought the 13 Pro Max with 256 gig. Now I do have a family related reason for why I'm getting 1 terabyte, because I will be handing down this device to my cousin, who will then use it to the full extent, because she takes like 100 pictures a day. She has 3 kids and really likes having everything beautifully displayed. But yeah, in my opinion, the 15 Pro Max is really worth it. I think it's an amazing upgrade. I think you will be able to keep it for years and years, though maybe you could wait for something like, I don't know how much that exists in India, but like Chinese Lunar New Year, for example. There you get usually big discounts. Here in the West we have Black Friday. I don't know if you have an equivalent to that in India. You wouldn't get the discount directly from Apple, but maybe through a carrier. And also, I don't know if you have the option to do like 24-month financing, which is probably what I'm gonna end up doing. I'm probably gonna end up buying the iPhone with like 24 months payments with 0% percentage up. So that's actually really comfortable for me. I do have the money, but why pay it if I don't have to right away?
Our Lightning now. Maybe they'll switch that in the next couple months. But now I'm genuinely curious if there's going to be a bunch of new USB.
Yeah, they will switch the other accessories. I'm not even sure if MagSafe Duo is like coming back, but which, by the way, I think it would be pretty dope if like Apple Watches supported actual MagSafe. Then we could actually have like a MagSafe, you know, like Duo. Like, you know, we could have 2 fully functional MagSafe ports that work for every accessory. That would be dope, but I don't think it's gonna happen.
See phone accessories because of the iPhone getting USB-C, similar to our sponsor of this video, Anker. So they've made a whole new lineup of products for the iPhone 15, headlined by the Anker Nano, which is like this little small but mighty USB-C power bank.
They also have like their more premium things, which I'm probably gonna buy something from.
I can crank out 30 watts with the built-in USB-C cable.
It looks cute. I don't like it though.
30 watts. And if you have that little button up at the top here, it'll actually show a literal percentage of how much battery you have left.
I usually don't watch sponsor stuff, but I'm actually interested in this.
Which counts down so you really know exactly how much of the 10,000 milliamp hours you have left. Plus, there's some other stuff in the lineup. There's a wall charger, braided USB-C cables.
It
So
doesn't
feel free
come
to
to
learn
Germany,
more about Anker's
unfortunately.
new lineup at the link below. And shout out to Anker for sponsoring this video. So iPhone 15 Pro will start at the same price as last year, which is $999, but they've bumped up iPhone 15 Pro Max sneakily, interestingly. It will start at $1199, but it's also the only one with the 5x camera, and it's the only one that starts at 256 gigs. And last year...
By the way, I love this choice. Now, some people have said like, oh, still 128 on the Pro? Yeah, I think the Pro, because it has a smaller phone, it is a smaller screen, right? Yes, it does have like the bigger, the nice big cameras and even like a 3x telephoto and stuff like that. Sure, 256 would definitely be nice on the device, but you have to consider this is now from 2017 on. So 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and now 2023, where Apple has kept the same base price for iPhones. Now, they did double the storage, like the iPhone 10 started with 64 gigabytes, where at 128 would be nice to be at 256. Don't think that's such a big deal if you can get 256 for $100 more. Now, again, you can buy a $100 NVMe 4 drive with 1 terabyte, but that's a different discussion. But when you actually consider how like the profit margins work for iPhone, I don't think it's actually that unfair, especially now thanks to the European prices being better. I personally feel less offended than I did last year. And then you have to consider that they've changed from like stainless steel to titanium. They went from like OLED panels, sure, premium OLED panels, but now very premium LTPO OLED panels. Like, they got rid of Lightning, which was a small source of extra revenue, but nevertheless, with like some MFI things, which they don't seem to have fully like replicated. I don't know if that is yet to follow, or if the rumors about the USB-C here being somewhat limited are completely garbage. I hope they are. I hope the iPhone works well with any USB 3 cable. Yeah, so looks like MFI will be a smaller part of the iPhone story now. And then beyond that, we now have 3 cameras instead of 2. We have even now like a tetra prism camera on the Pro Max and stuff like that. We obviously have 5G. Not only are 5G modems more expensive than 4G modems, but Apple also has to pay like royalty stuff to Qualcomm with how their like agreement works. So it's objectively, and of course like just in general, like A17 3nm, super duper expensive, 8 gigs of RAM versus 3 in the iPhone 10. Sure, RAM has gotten cheaper, but Apple also uses better memory than they used in the iPhone 10. Yeah, this is an objectively much more expensive device for them to make. And the fact that the iPhone 15 Pro starts at the same $1,000. I don't want to say just, because it's obviously still a lot, but I actually think that's really impressive. Dimiki, you're saying thank you, brother, I assume for my recommendations. Very, very glad to help you, brother, as well.
The price of the 256 gig Pro was the same, so you're kind of matching. It's just like getting rid of the $1,100 phone for some reason. Either way.
What do you mean for some reason? It will gonna improve their average sales price. That's it. Because the Pro Max is going to be super popular, and because now they've also like price adjusted in some regions, again Europe and Great Britain, on stuff like storage. I actually do assume that a lot of people will like instinctively get like the one higher up model, like 512 or even 1 terabyte than they usually did. I think it's that simple what they plan on doing. And in America, quite honestly, the prices are phenomenal anyway, right? Like sure, like the prices get like adjusted up and down. Like Europe was egregious last year, and now India and Japan are pretty expensive. China is so because in China they're usually pretty cheap anyway, but now obviously it's gone up a little. So yeah, again, it is what it is. I don't think that there's anything weird about this. Quite honestly, I have not recommended anybody get a 128 gigabyte Pro Max ever, pretty much. Like maybe on the iPhone 11 Pro Max, I would have recommended like 128 gigs. Wait, was there even 128 gigs on the 11 Pro, or did you go from like 64 gig right to 256? For $150? I think that was the case. So yeah, there pretty much isn't then one. Well, unless we then go back to like, well, no. Wait, what are the storage configs? I'll go to like Mac Tracker here. I know that's a useless diversion, but like I really want to know. So iPhone 10. iPhone 10, right? Chip and memory. iPhone 10 came with what does it say? Oh, it's chip and memory. That will not have storage. Oh, it came in 64 or 256 gig. Yeah, so there weren't even 128 gig configurations because the base one was. And by the time they upgraded to 128 gig standard on like the 12 Pro Max, like I would have recommended anybody get 256 anyway, right? Yeah, so yeah, I cannot recommend you getting Pro Max ever with 128 gigabytes. I can now state that. Now that I've done my research, that's actually pretty interesting. I apologize for having to look down and stuff. That's where my iPad obviously is, but yeah, wait, I'm sorry. I'll just have to briefly charge my iPad here. Yeah, okay. Because it's charging through my Mac. Yeah, and now we can move on.
You know, if you're interested in these new iPhones at all, you're either in camp don't care at all, or you're in camp like totally getting one of these, or maybe you're watching to see if the reviews prove that the new features are worth it. Let me know what you're thinking. Comment section's always open.
Okay. So that was MKBHD. As I've said before, some smaller mistakes that are still pretty much noticeable. Not a bad not very hands-on-ish anyway, but I know it's difficult to go really into detailed hands-on with Apple. But yeah, not his best video. Definitely also not very high production value relatively, but then again, it's a hands-on, so I do understand that it's different. Now, next one, I would like to react to LTT.
Never again.
So I'll just briefly go back to the beginning, and then if we do have time, I would react to MrMobile, depending on how often I have to pause this one, because I do not like the title of this video. I'm not the biggest LTT fan, but maybe they are more open than I hope, than I expect them to, and maybe that will mean that we can move through this quite quickly. So let's get into it.
Never again. This cable has been one of the worst parts of living in Apple's walled garden ecosystem. But thanks to the year...
Nope. I mean, yeah, you could pretty much say it's maybe the worst part of a pretty fantastic ecosystem, though. Like, come on. Exciting electronics, lol. What are you laughing at, man?
Tim Apple has been forced to join the rest of the modern world and move over to the universally accepted standard.
Yeah, standard that Apple has helped build, USB-C, and they've introduced basically is one of the first mass-produced products with the MacBook at 12 inches. But whatever, who cares about history? Who cares about context? Who cares that Apple actually promised on stage that Lightning would be like their connector for a decade from 2012?
Of USB-C.
Exciting electronics, you made a video. That's, yeah, I understand, but I apologize for maybe not reacting to your video. I assume if you're asking that, but because for one, time is already running pretty low. But I would, if you like, leave me a link on Twitter to your video, I would probably watch it, and if it's good, I'll leave a like or a comment tomorrow.
At least, that's the version of events that the government...
No, I have not seen your video yet.
This was all
I haven't seen the videos yet that I'm reacting to. I have, well, exciting electronics. If I like your video later on, I would actually love to give you a subscription. I don't have a problem with that at all. I do have a separate account though, so I'm not going to follow you from this one because I'm really stingy with whatever. But I do have another YouTube account that is just for like my crazy stuff. You don't have Twitter. Well, how else could you contact me then? Oh, I'll just look up your channel through afterwards, because is your channel the same one as what you are typing in from now? Because then it's perfectly okay.
Their own volition? Definitely not, because they lost a protracted legal battle.
Yeah, I know. I've also mentioned that time and time again. Apple is switching to USB-C because of European regulations, also potential regulations in India, Saudi Arabia, other countries as well. So yeah, they were basically forced. I've always said that I don't think that this is how governments should act, because I am actually a leftist, so I'm pretty fine with government interventions into big companies. It's just I usually prefer for that to happen when it comes to environmental stuff, security and privacy reasons. To a degree, national security, I can be fine with that. Obviously not shit like the Patriot Act or something like that. But like dictating which cable to use... that's so cringe. And also, like, please guys, look at actual like EU legislation stuff. They like legislate currently like who is a gatekeeper, right? iOS is and App Store are currently getting labeled as gatekeepers, which is what gonna lead to site loading next spring. so that has its pros and cons, but for some reason we don't yet have like comprehensive legislation on like AI art and intellectual property and analyzing stuff from the internet to feed AI algorithms, even though it's been happening for like a decade. People have been preparing to, like, they've been collecting data and now they're using it, and guess what, because there are no regulations right now, they can do pretty much whatever they want, and they consider such a law 10 times more important than whatever shit the European Union is working on technology wise. So yeah, again, glad they're switching to USB-C, not a massive fan of how it actually happened, right? Sometimes that's how it happens, right? Like, you like the end goal but not the road, how you got there. Like, maybe you had like a pretty shitty like vacation flight, but then the vacation itself was awesome, you know?
Anywho, regardless of the reason, I see this as an absolute win. But depending which iPhone you buy, it might be more or less of a win. You see, USB-C isn't so much a standard specification as it is a menu of optional specifications.
By the way, it needs to be. Like, I have called out that USB-C can be weird, but you have to understand that USB-C can and will exist down to like the dumbest microphone, right? Or even like a TV remote. USB-C does not by default need to be like 5 or 10 gigabits or 120 watt charging and stuff like that. It needs to be what a device needs, and what a device needs is decided by the manufacturer based on what people are actually willing to buy or not. This idea that like USB-C is problematic because of not being super standardized, yeah, I never bought into this. What I don't like is the actual standards, the way they're named and the way they're enforced. They can be pretty weird. Like, currently, like, what the basis for Thunderbolt 5 is USB 4 version 2.0. Why could we not get USB 5? I understand that it has to do with like, oh, the signaling technology is still similar, right? USB 4 was very different in how it accepts like PCIe signals potentially versus USB 3. So that warranted the like the changing of the number. But apparently having like 120 gigabits peak bandwidth speeds or like 80 up and down simultaneously does not warrant like speed, like a different branding, like to USB 5. The fuck, like this is why I like actually Thunderbolt. I think Thunderbolt is nicely much more standardized. It also happens to have like one major supplier for the actual part, which helps as well. It's been like co-developed with Apple and Intel makes like the Thunderbolt control chips. So yeah, to me it's like hilarious how bad like USB is standardized. It's just I don't actually think it needs like one at least basic standard. Like USB 2 speeds are still fine for several devices. You can argue if they're fine for the 15 and 15 plus, but obviously not every device ever needs faster than 480 Mbits. Like, there's USB-C in freaking like vape, whatever they're called, like basically the vape gadgets, right? Do they need 5 gigabits per second? Do they need Thunderbolt? Do they need 50 or even 60 watt charging? No, they don't.
So not every iPhone, or every cable for that matter, is going to support the same feature.
Yeah, and not every cable does that right now, even though years of Android being super standard and most Android devices now having at least like 5 gigabits per second did not help along the cable market much.
We'll get into that later. The bottom line for now, though, is universal charging is finally here no matter what device you're using, or which segue I do, to our sponsor.
Ugreen. What's better than power? Unlimited power. Ugreen's 300.
I'm keeping the sponsors because, for one, I'm actually pretty interested in this one. I did just say that I'm considering the Anchor one. Like, I know Ugreen is like a less premium brand, But this is like $200, I believe, right? And it has like 4 or 5 USB-C ports, a USB-A port. This thing is so fucking sick. It supports 140 watt peak charging, so 240 watts would be nice, but I doubt that I'll ever really need it. Like maybe an M3 Max MacBook would support like 240 watts charging. Currently the 16-inch supports 140 watts. My 14-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro supports what does it support? 100 watts. So it has like a shipped in like 96 watt adapter, which I'm currently charging from. So yeah, and I have no problem charging my MacBook, keeping it fully charged while doing an OBS stream. I'm charging my iPhone from this, which is recording this video, which I should just, yeah, correct it ever so slightly. It's charging obviously my microphone, but that doesn't need too much charge, and it's charging my M1 iPad Pro. So 100 watts is quite a lot.
100-watt multi-port GAN charger is packed with features like PD 3.1 hyper-fast charging, 4 high-power USB-C ports, and more. Check it out at the link below.
Apple actually has a long history of innovation when it comes to USB-C. They were heavily involved in the development of the standard, contributing 20% of the engineers, according to 9to5Mac.
And apparently, when you believe rumors, that the actual final design is Apple.
The first to announce a USB-C laptop, which was a big deal since it supported data transfer and charging over a single port, and they shipped the first USB-C iOS device, the iPad Pro, almost 5 years ago, with support for all kinds of
in 2018,
like external storage and peripherals and high-resolution displays. And now, that's all coming to the iPhone.
Not all.
Sort of. If you had Apple's iPhone 15...
By the way, that's also not universally true. I mean, sure, you can argue that the iPad Pro from 2018 already had like USB 3 speeds, but then you look at something like the 10th gen iPad and it does have USB-C, but it also limited to 2.0 speeds. So if anybody thought that Apple was guaranteed to do 3.0 speeds or higher on the iPhone, I don't know what to tell you. They clearly don't.
An Apple Watch announcement up on your secondary monitor, you might have missed how they glossed over a tiny detail regarding the switch to USB-C. That's right, it's goodbye Lightning, but hello again to our dear friend USB 2.0, who recently celebrated their 23rd birthday. Happy belated, buddy.
Well, at least it's younger than I am.
Just like the old Lightning cable, USB-C on the regular iPhone 15 is stuck at a 2000 era transfer speed of just 480 megabit per second. It's not.
It's not though 2000 era just. Well, it's 2000th era, right, with like an S in the end, because it's been like the standard for almost a decade before like USB 3 came out. So while yes, the standard was standardized a long time ago, and I'm obviously not excusing how old it is at this point, it's you also have to consider like the necessity of smartphone versus the necessities of actual PCs, especially as at that point we were starting to get like decent hard drives, so they still probably could get by with USB 2 for the most part at that point. And definitely by any point when we started getting SSDs, that's when we really needed to move beyond that.
Unusable if all you're doing is sending the odd file over the wires, but it is...
Or you're not sending anything over the wires, or what I'm currently doing is I'm doing a 1080p feed from my iPhone, and apparently that works perfectly fine with 480 Mbits.
Pretty outdated compared to the competition. For context,
it's not universally. I mean, I understand that we've had like USB 3 speeds on other phones for years and years. I'm not calling that out, but it's not needed for most people. Like, even for myself, like, I don't need it. Like, I might need it once I would do like ProRes streaming in a way, like, you know, like data transferring to my Mac or something. But yeah, currently I don't need it. All I do is transfer stuff wirelessly, and I'm perfectly fine with Apple cheaping out on it.
Samsung moved their flagships to USB 3 10 years ago, and you need to go all the way down to their A-series devices to find anything that's still using USB 2.
Yeah, and as much as this is more expensive than an A-series phone, this is how Apple treats it. It is not their premium device.
Today.
Also, by the way, you could make the point that like, oh, a 2013 Samsung had USB 3? Why does the Galaxy A series does not have USB 3 in 2023? Well, Apple treats their non-Pro iPhones similar to the A series.
However,
in fact, sometimes worse when you consider stuff like higher refresh rate.
To Apple's credit, if you pony up for the iPhone 15 Pro, you not only get support for USB 3, but it runs at a whopping 10 gigabit per second, which might not matter for those small file transfers I talked about before, but it could matter for some of the features that Apple just introduced. More on those later. First, let's talk about the aspect of USB-C that most people are going to...
Oh my god, is this just a USB-C video for like half of it? Oh, this is so cringe. Oh, this is designed to appeal to like their fanboys. No wonder this they still keep Apple videos on the main channel and like not on MAC address, because they're like addressing people who want to be outraged at Apple. People will be like, well, I wanted to spend less, right? If they had given me like USB 3 and ProMotion and a third camera and maybe even titanium on the non-Pro phones, I would have bought it, right? From clearly an Android fanboy who was not going to buy an iPhone, and also asking Apple to like give up on like 50% of their margins, which sure, I mean that's how capitalism does work theoretically, not though when you consider the overall market response to how well the pros have been doing for years and years in terms of sales. Yeah, so this does have a fanboyish nature, like an anti-Apple nature in that regard.
Care about. Charging. You get a C2C cable in the box, so that's good, but like many recent mobile products, there is no included wall wart, so
great,
hopefully you
that's good.
Have one. Also, it should be noted that both the 15 and the 15 Pro are still limited to 20-watt charging. So, if you're the kind of person who just gets...
They're not. They're objectively not. 27 watts is pretty much what you should expect. I don't know if they will support 35 watts. This is the rating, by the way. Apple rates this with 20 watts because this is the cheapest non-5 watts adapter that they have, and they've standardized their charging standards around it. It's not does not mean that Apple does not give you somewhat faster charging.
Bothered when the capability of a standard is not fully utilized? Well, then you might prefer the 210-watt charging of a Redmi Note 12 Explorer, but personally, I don't care. The fact that I only have to carry around one type of cable now for my Switch, my laptop, my phone, my friend's phone who won't buy the same kind as me, and now we have different colored bubbles. It's just such a relief that I am not going to complain about minor things like charging watts. And besides, with Apple's focus on overall platform efficiency, their batteries tend to be smaller than the competition, so these new devices should charge in about an hour. Now let's talk about the next big thing, performance. The all-new A17 Pro processor is kind of exciting. It's built on TSMC's cutting-edge 3nm process, and inside it you'll find 6 CPU cores, 6 GPU cores, and as far as I can tell, an angry tiger that looks ready to absolutely shred any workload you throw at this thing. I mean, look at this. Genshin Impact looks great on the iPhone 15 Pro, and that's cool, but my mind wasn't really blown until they showed Resident Evil Village and the RE4 remake, as far as I can tell, running locally on a flippin' iPhone. I mean, I just about wore out my X key seeing how smooth and beautiful the footage looked, given that they didn't do the demo live. But if this is real and reflective of the gaming experience,
it will be.
Nintendo's handheld competition from Valve is the least of their concerns.
Yeah, that was actually what I thought as well. You have to also consider when the Switch is coming out. Sure, the iPhone is dramatically more expensive than the Switch, but the iPhone is way more versatile than the Switch as a camera, an actual phone. Like, we have to go back to like the Steve Jobs introduction of the original iPhone, like a smartphone, an internet communications device, an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator, an iPad, a phone, and an internet communicator. Are you getting it? Right? Like, sure, the Switch will be cheaper and probably faster thanks to like active cooling, which the iPhone won't have, though you can just buy like a MagSafe based fan. That's quite interesting to cool it down your device. So yeah, I actually, and also if the Switch actually takes to like April 2025 or even like holiday 2024, if it does not get introduced like by spring or summer next year, by that point Apple will also have an iPhone that is not Pro with ray tracing and higher performance and stuff like that. And then also beyond that, then sure, the Switch will not have ProMotion, so don't even try to compare, oh, the iPhone, the non-Pros next year will also not have ProMotion. The year after that, all iPhones will have ProMotion, and then you will have like an A19 at that point, and then a year after you're getting like the A20, which will probably be built on like 2 nanometer. So while there is a chance that Nintendo will use like an Samsung 8 nanometer like chip, which is based on RTX 30 series, which sure is nice, but Apple now also has AI upscaling. They do have native hardware ray tracing. Metal, by all accounts, is better than DX12, and DX12 is still the more functional API versus Vulkan, unless you're like its software and really know how to program Doom. Like, Vulkan really has not been that fantastic for the most part, and even DX12, by the way, it's by no means even good. People often go back to like a DX11 render because those are usually more stable than DX12. Apple does not have that problem with Metal, and now they will also have like intercompatibility between stuff that you buy on iPhone, iPad, Mac, maybe the Apple TV. Oh my, yeah, like, I know Apple TV does not matter that much, and it will probably take it like 5 years to get like an A17 class chip. Well, but it's on the A15 currently, so maybe it will take it like 2 years. But this to me is like so whack. I think Apple actually has now something that, I know Nintendo will have their own games and they will be fine, but I think in the grand scheme of things, I probably would buy my child a smartphone like this versus buying them like a gaming tablet like the Switch. I know it's not like the Switch by itself is bad, but it is not current hardware by any stretch now, and if I buy them an iPhone right now and they can keep it for as long as they would a Switch, I mean, sure, Mario and stuff, they might not be able to play that on a Switch-like device, but hell, my kids in the future will be able to play that stuff on a Mac, because Ryujinx works really, really good.
It's kind of nuts. Hardware accelerated ray tracing, Metal FX upscaling, up to 1 terabyte of storage, 6.1 inch screen with 460 pixels per inch, 1600 nit peak brightness in HDR, Wi-Fi 6E AV1 decoding, and up to 29 hours of video playback on battery. I mean, sure, gaming is bound to eat through that battery life a little bit faster, but even with the hefty price tag of $1,000 for the base Pro model, considering the weight and the size of the device and the fact that it does all the other stuff it does and you're going to be carrying it around with you anyway, you guys are going to have to download this video before I delete it, but I think Apple's pricing might actually be justified. There is a downside.
It's not a might, it's definitely justified.
Not many games are built for Metal, but if Apple's new porting tool...
More and more are getting built with Metal, and the game porting toolkit is already working really well. Unlike what Linus showed in his video covering the game porting toolkit, it actually works really well.
Tools do gain traction, that caveat might end up aging like fine milk. Just like your old Android devices that are sitting in a drawer with zero modern software support.
Yeah.
Another thing Apple keeps doing right.
Also, by the way, like I do want to very briefly notice software support, because some people have pointed out that like the iPhone 10, which will be stuck on iOS 16, does not get like iOS 17 and stuff like that. We just got updates to iOS 16, which is where the iPhone 10 is stuck, and then to iOS 15, which is where some older devices, even like my own 7 Plus, are stuck. So security updates and even like some very small like stability updates, if there was like a big bug still in the system, though Apple usually will not solve anything smaller, right? It's usually like it's fixing stuff that maybe a potential security update or something broke, but you're still getting those updates. And sure, while you definitely are not getting an iPhone 15 Pro Max experience on an iPhone 7 Plus, but for logical reasons, like you still get what is technically new software, which on Android, sure, you can sort of deal with like some workarounds, some mods. You can like essentially jailbreak the system, then install like a very like open version that gets updates which are not properly driver optimized, or you get like a Samsung which will give you 4 years of software support, which is 2 years less by default than the iPhone, and that is versus old iPhones. I promise you that the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max will be getting updates for years and years. A17 chip, 8 gigs of RAM, LPDDR5, that will keep it going for years and years. And then like next year's like LPDDR5X, even more bandwidth, potentially ever so slightly more performance updates. I do assume that those devices will get like between 7 and 8 years of full software support. Maybe sometimes they would go down to 6 if there's like a really ambitious update in between, but that's really speculative.
Porting older devices, even if it ends up slowing them down a bit. And you might not care a whole lot about the extra performance of this new chip today.
I do.
Don't, as long as my phone's fast enough, whatever. But in 5 years, when your iPhone is getting the freshest updates, it could make the difference between feeling the need to upgrade or still feeling completely fine on your now many generations old device. Don't get me wrong, regardless of how pro they are, I'm still not thrilled that phones randomly cost over $1,000 freaking now.
That's such a weird perspective. Like the profit margin on the iPhone 15 on the iPhone Pros is not that significantly higher than a higher end Nvidia graphics card, like 50-60%, right? Sometimes 100 if it's we are talking about like the highest ends or something like that. Though the RTX 4090 is actually not as egregiously priced because they also like paired with like a board that can support like 450-500 watts. Yeah, like this idea that just because it's $1,000 or more, like, dude, where have you been for years and years? Like, when you compare it versus the iPhone 10, this is literally the cheapest an iPhone has been for years and years and years. Like, it's cheaper than last year, it's cheaper than the year before, because inflation is a thing, wage adjustment is a thing, and you can keep your devices for longer, which adds to the value. I actually would say Apple was perfectly justified in upping up the price on both phones with more storage. That was always like I do think that they could have gotten away with giving 128 gigabytes, especially to the smaller one, even with a slightly like $50 higher price tag. But why move away from $9.99? That one is so attractive. Like, people go in, they see like, oh, it's $9.99. Oh, it's just $100 more for $256, and Apple keeps like $96 from the $100 you pay extra, because it costs them literally nothing to move from 128 to 256 gigabytes. Silicon Magic, hi. You are coming in probably like not at the end of the stream, but like the the third basically. We did go through MKBHD's video. Now we've gone through like half of LTT's video. There was a lot about like USB-C and him complaining about USB 2 speeds, but he's been very positive on like the A17 and stuff. But of course you can always check out what I've talked to prior, as when this video goes like live as a VOD.
But given the alleged cost of the latest manufacturing nodes,
it's $27,000 probably. Those prices he's shown are likely too low.
With the A17 Pro at its heart, the iPhone 15 Pro is looking like the biggest generational leap in...
Yeah, I think it's actually getting really good. I didn't like the first 3 minutes when they were just talking about like USB-C, USB-C, but once he actually pivoted into talking about A17, the actual value proposition, even mentioning like long-term software support, I actually think the quality picked up here.
At least a little while. I'm talking spatial video capture that you can upload to the Apple Vision.
Yeah, right. I actually like the recap now because it will prevent me from having to go to Apple's tech specs website, because I think by this point we have broken down almost every spec point. Like even he mentioned stuff like Wi-Fi 6E, which is cool. And yeah, spatial video. You can use the main and the ultra wide together. It will come out as a software update later this year and definitely before Vision Pro launches. And then you record like 3D video, which will look good on a Vision Pro that
might become affordable at some point. The ability to capture ProRes footage straight out of that high-speed USB port into an external storage device for easy ingest and video editing. The titanium materials that make it the lightest Pro model ever, the thinner bezels, replaceable back glass.
The titanium alone, you have to consider the inflation, the design philosophy that went into making the device more repairable, working with metallurgists to not just make it out of titanium, but giving the titanium different colors, which is not as easy as some make it out to be sometimes. It's very difficult to give metals like, well, it's easy for like aluminum, but it can be really difficult to give like metals really nice colors. And apparently Apple even forgot how to do that on aluminum, but hey, they're capable of doing that with titanium. Silicon Magic, well, criticizing USB 2 usage in 2023 is just fair, I would say. Yeah, I'm not saying against the actual criticism. I'm saying I didn't like the pacing of the video in the beginning.
I mean, that's super cool.
With the criticism, like he should have gotten to some other stuff prior to this, because with the way YouTube works, which I know now because I run a small YouTube channel, is people really tend to not watch the whole video. I mean, sure, and I'm not even talking about like my streams. I know obviously people will not watch an entire stream, but people still don't watch even an entire 10-12 minute video. So the fact that he really like jam-packed the first 4 minutes with like a ton of criticisms really colors the opinions of people that will watch the video. But if they actually watched the second half through and through, they would have come off with a much more positive impression. That was my main criticism here.
Button. Finally,
like what? Were you happy with the Bixby button?
Okay, this is kind of sick, guys. And up to 5x telephoto zoom on the Pro Max. Like, the gang's all here, guys. It's a pretty compelling package. If there was ever a generation to skip and a...
Also, by the way, like, he is a Galaxy Z Fold user, so yeah, I understand that this is compelling, but it's way more compelling than any Fold ever was.
Generation to buy. It seems like they're called 14 and 15. Even the non-Pro 15 has a lot going for it here. I mean, you might hate the lighter colors compared to the more adult Pro line, and you might be disappointed, like I am, that it's stuck with the last generation A16 Bionic chip, which, come to think of it, is probably the reason that it's also saddled with USB 2. But it is still a formidable performer, and it comes with a slew of upgrades like machine-learned voice isolation during your calls, a roadside assistance program in partnership with AAA to...
By the way, those are all software features. It's interesting that he chooses to point out those roadside activated with like satellite service and stuff like that is also coming to all iPhones that have satellite services.
flesh out their SOS emergency features, a second-gen ultra-wideband tip to help find friends or items.
A small differentiator, by the way, the S23 lineup comes with Wi-Fi 6E across the board, but you only get an ultra-wideband chip in the Ultra, while on the iPhone it's the other way around. You get Wi-Fi 6E only on the Pros, but you get ultra-wideband in all iPhones. So it's an interesting difference in priorities. Silicon Magic, me too, like the more saturated color. Oh, the 12. No, but forget the 12, though I do work a lot with the 12. Like the 13th generation, like the 13th colors are all so beautiful. Like the product red on the 13, man, like, wait, which generation had like that really nice blue? Like, let me, iPhone 12 blue? Or was that, yeah, the blue was the best on the iPhone 12. How did it look? Yeah, and then it got bad on the 13. But the iPhone 13 had the best product red, as far as I know. Yes. So, best blue is iPhone 12. Best red is product red on iPhone 13. And no new best blue is titanium blue now on the 15 Pro Max. I really like that, everything about it.
Crowded or cluttered spaces, and the cool dynamic island feature that hit the iPhone 14 Pro, that is now on the 15 and the 15 Pro with some minor improvements. They have crammed a lot into these tiny devices. Kind of like how we crammed a lot into our new stubby version of the LTT screen.
By the way, we have 10 people watching. A big heart for this. If anybody's here who hasn't yet subscribed and is enjoying the content, please consider subscribing, giving the thumbs up so that more people will know that the stream is good, that yet YouTube algorithm actually really cares about that. Yeah, if you're enjoying this, please do the YouTube stuff.
Screwdriver. Get yours today, lttstore.com. Speaking of small devices, they also talked about the new Apple Watch Series 9 and...
Oh, yeah, now I won't have to do any recap, hardware recap. That's actually good. Good that he's talking about the Apple Watch. That will be give me a good opportunity to talk about the Apple Watch myself. Silicon Magic, you just don't like red. Yeah, well, yeah, it's an opinion, obviously.
Both of them are featuring the S9 System in a Package, or SIP, with 5.6 billion transistors with a B. That is more transistors, and I know this is not an apples-to-apples comparison, but that is more than a GTX 680. And speaking of graphics, it boasts a...
it's interesting because the power improvements this year, like nominally, when you just look at CPU, when you just look at rasterization on the GPU, are not that impressive. But Apple is giving us, like, well, on the iPhone, it's not that big of a transistor increase, right? It's 16 to 19 billion, which is 20% more. But here, with 5.6 billion transistors, I believe they've said it's like 60% more transistors for something that is 30% more powerful. Well, they've beefed up the neural engine, which is something people don't talk about as much as CPU or GPU, but now Siri can run natively on your Apple Watch. That's so fucking cool. I almost wonder they also gave like the Apple Watch 64 gigabytes of base storage instead of 32. That makes me wonder if they gave that so that like on-device machine learning models might they get like really big in time as the phone really adjusts to your voice and stuff like that. Could that really like need more storage? Now it won't obviously take up all the 64 gigabytes, but maybe it needs 1 or 2 gigabytes overall, all this smart on-device stuff, which is so cool. The value is really there, and we'll get to like additional features. I think he'll talk about it. I really like this generation. This is why I'm buying the Ultra 2. Well, I've already bought it and it's coming next Friday, and in Europe it's $100 less expensive than the Ultra was last year.
30% faster GPU. I don't know if Apple Watches ever necessarily felt like they were too slow, but if you consider how much they're trying to offload to this thing now, it might just need all that processing power.
Exactly.
Siri requests are now going to be handled locally. Finding your iPhone by using your watch has never been easier, and the screen has never been brighter or dimmer for that matter, managing to run it anywhere from 2,000 or 3,000 nits, depending on if you want to pay Lord money or King money for a watch, all the way down to just one. The coolest
$800 is not king money for a watch.
feature, though, and one that, if we're being realistic, is probably going to start a new trend where people make this gesture when they want people to shut up, is the double tap hand gesture.
It has a little bit of like, you know, like the Italian hands, right? Like, by the way, I've seen some confusion about this feature. I'll let him talk and then I'll comment on it.
That you can use to answer or end phone calls when you're wearing the watch. You just double tap and you've hung up. How cool would it be if that worked in real life? Someone's like talking at you while you're trying to focus and you're just like, I want...
A small recommendation to all guys out here, which I know is like 98% of my audience. I assume the other 2% are my grandma and my mom. Is don't do like zip movements or anything, or don't ask the woman if she's on her period when she has bad mood. And similar to like, don't ask guys if they're constipated if they have bad mood. So there's a lot of like, also probably don't do that to anybody who's like potentially a criminal, because they will fucking cut off your finger. That's like extremely rude already. So I would get fucking angry. I only imagine if you have like some mobster guy in front of you.
I wanted to do it pretty badly when they showed the cringy Mother Nature.
Nope. I will maintain that I think the introduction to the Mother Nature's ad was extremely cringy. I think it makes total sense that they did it. I actually think they put in a ton of very useful information into a short period of time. Is it the best like design skit ever? No, of course not. But it's actually really meaningfully useful information that, quite honestly, a lot of Apple critics should take to heart. Apple is a hyper-capitalist company by all accounts, and they're obviously more beholden to shareholders and to the whims of customers than they are to the overall environmental goal. However, at the pace that they are taking to achieve their own internal environmental goals that go far beyond what any government is currently regulating from them is impressive. Like, if you actually ask experts, it's impressive. It could always be more, I'm not denying that, and it will be more. It will be more by every year. Even beyond when they reach total carbon neutrality in 2030, they could get like extra aggressive when it comes to recycling. They could get extra aggressive when it comes to certain materials. Maybe they could become like carbon negative and stuff like that. Like, that's all cool, and it's worth pointing out.
To boast about how carbon neutral they are. I mean, don't get me wrong. I am stoked for any progress that we can make.
Will he say that without right to repair, that doesn't matter?
Towards reducing our impact on the planet. But wow, that was something else. To save you from having to watch it, long story short, by 2030 they are aiming to be net zero.
Okay, he doesn't talk about the Apple Watch. That gesture. Some people have pointed out that the gesture is already an accessibility feature, so why is it basically exclusive to the Apple Watch? Apple has explained that there are new sensors in terms of like better sensors in terms of the gyroscope, and what is basically like recognizing the blood flow in your vessels in your hand here, which helps them better understand when you're doing this motion. Now, the way this and there are some other accessibility motions are currently implemented through accessibility will allow you to do a ton of those things. The difference here, though, is that they can be hit and miss. I've actually tried them on my Series 4. They're not always hyper precise. They sometimes do require like really like a pinch movement, like a hard one. This seems to be designed to be like a really easy tap stuff, which opens it up to be integrated into the native user experience. Accessibility is fantastic, but accessibility usually has a few downsides in terms of how good the feature actually works with the rest of the system. Like the double and triple tap shortcuts currently on the iPhone backside they can be really hit and miss. This is why I've been such a big advocate for getting the action button, because now we have basically 3 buttons, right? You have the action button, you have the double tap and the triple tap on the back. That is fantastic, but explaining the double and triple tap to people and then having people try it out, and especially with a case failing, that is not good. So I'm really happy that they're doing a similar thing here, which is, to me, this in the Apple Watch Series 9 and Ultra 2 is basically equivalent to how the action button is a more guaranteed to work alternative to the double and triple tap, rather than a whole new feature in of itself. That's how I choose to look at it, basically.
Their entire business. But just, Apple, next time, please just tell us that. Or better yet, tell us that you've also improved your repairability.
They did.
A few other things.
Oh my, really? He won't mention that? They improved repairability. Like, as I've said before, the 15 Pro is now way more easy to repair. They now do give you DIY instructions. They do give you parts. Like, come on, Linus. Come on.
Better health features with biking support and advanced metrics, name drop on watchOS 10,
that is software
better
features.
That iPhone support.
He clearly like read some stuff from the website and was not fully able to differentiate what is actually exclusive and what isn't.
HomePod connectivity, waypoints and precision finding. There's a depth app for diving, so if you're a diver, that's pretty cool. Most of this though is, hey, that's cool, but kind of niche and things that only some of you will care about. And if you do, we're going to have links to the pre-order page down below.
But that's what also you're supposed to do, though, right? Once you're serving tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people, you have to start covering niche shit, because niche is no longer inexistent. Niche is often used to be like, oh, this feature basically does not matter. Once you're serving hundreds of millions of people, niche becomes something you should care about, because those are still people you could potentially lose as customers if somebody else does those niche features better.
Start shipping September 22nd. We'll also have some alternative phones linked down below, but I gotta say, considering everything Apple showed off today, it's starting to feel like the grass is looking pretty green inside that walled garden.
Silicon Magic, what did this? Where did they say that? I mean, besides the real glass thing. Well, the other stuff has been happening for like the last 2 years, like Apple's DIY incentive, where you can buy parts, and it does apply to iPhones. It usually takes them like 3 months after a device rolls out, because in those 3 months, devices are also like covered by warranty and stuff like that. They're covered by warranty for longer than that, but it takes them a while to post that stuff. Which also now means there are manuals. Now those manuals are not the easiest one to understand, but Apple now posts manuals, which is a big change over like 2.5, 3 years ago. And beyond that, Apple has started using like pull tabs for their batteries on the iPad for quite a while, and obviously on the iPhone and stuff like that. So now they do have a standard port with USB-C, which means you can much easier find a replacement part. So this idea that just because they like did not make a fair phone, it's not easier to replace, like that rear glass thing, that sounds like a small thing, but it's literally unique when it comes to high-end devices with really great water resistance. You don't get that from anybody else. Other phones are, well, most phones are back repairable, right? They've prioritized the battery. Apple had prioritized the front glass. Well, now you don't have to choose on the iPhone. You still choose on most Android phones, unless again we start talking about like cheaper, like more plasticky devices, or we are talking about like the Fairphone.
Green, like this segue to our sponsor.
Okay. Yeah, not a bad video by any means. I think some things fell a little short, but that's probably also due to the length of the video. I think too much of it was like sacrificed for like a 4-minute like USB-C explainer. It's not a bad video though, like by LTT standards it's definitely decent. And last but well, probably least in terms of like market recognition is MrMobile. Mr. Fisher by his real name, and I was actually curious about his video because I liked the last few videos that I reacted to from him, so that was interesting. Well, that was interesting to me, I wanted to say.
True story. On the flight to Cupertino to attend the first iPhone launch to which I've ever been invited, I realized I left two...
Well, yeah, and this is what I always don't understand. Like, some people are like, oh, Apple excludes me. There is a limited amount of people that they invite, and like MKBHD is a guarantee. Mr. Who, like, who's the guy who does like extensive camera tests? Like super staff and stuff like that, people like that are basically guaranteed. So anybody with a channel below like 1 million is pretty much like not guaranteed anything unless you're also connected to like a larger news site. So like Rene Ritchie, for example, had like a smaller channel, but he also was like connected to like iMore, I believe, right? And then of course people from The Verge and stuff like that, they're invited because they are doing coverage that millions of people watch in the long run, including reviews and stuff like that, and gadgets, all that jazz. So when people talk like, oh, MrMobile is excluded because he like likes foldables, no, guess what? Apple does not care about every single YouTuber you might care about. And yeah, there might be some big ones who Apple really does not like Unboxed Therapy. Like, I don't even know what the dude does. I mean, if he really wanted to, he probably could get into it, but like his type of content is really useless for Apple. Like, I don't know anybody who watches Unboxed Therapy for like guidelines for what to buy. They really watch it for like the fucking unboxing and then watch him take a picture of his little cactus. Like maybe he updated to something else from the cactus. And then Jerry Rick everything. Like, Apple will never invite him. And guess what? I cannot blame him. This has nothing to do with negative coverage. It has everything to do with useless coverage. He does not do regular phone reviews. He does phone destruction porn. Like, it's the same. Like, it's the same thing of like, oh, why does this developer not give the game to every review site? Well, for one thing, you don't need to give it to every review site, but then like, at least a game review site is a game review site. Not every tech YouTuber is a tech reviewer by traditional means. It's like if you gave like a game instead of like to like a game review site, but to a channel that was like prioritizing like only covering bugs. Right? Only bugs, never talking about the actual quality of the game. Like Russell Wong, welcome to the stream. I don't always know what emoji you are sharing. It's difficult to tell from how far away I am, right? And like Digital Foundry is like an exception where they cover like graphics. They don't actually review games, but they do get like early codes. So, but again, they do not like destroy a game in the way that like Jerry Rick everything destroys phones. So yeah, and MrMobile clearly was not that interested in iPhones for the last couple of years. He's done like reviews that he called for iPhone that he called like the green bubble perspective. Like, yeah. And also his reviews come out usually pretty late by iPhone standards. So it's not what Apple really, even if he was doing like bad reviews, but they were like day one, they were like really in depth, he would have had better chances over the last couple of years than if he had done the kind of content that he actually ended up doing.
Things back on the East Coast. The last 1% of my iPhone's battery and the lightning cable that would have helped me solve that problem.
I'll admit, that's funny. That's funny though.
Years, each one of which is more than happy to charge my MacBook, my Android phones, my camera, my headphones, my microphones, my field recorder, but not the iPhone, which, devoid of its crucial cable with proprietary plug, remained sadly inert until I bought another.
That was the wireless charging. like not in the airplane, right? But it's still a standard charge mechanism.
Last lightning cable that I'll ever need to buy. Today, in the Steve Jobs Theater, Apple confirmed that my dream of charging all my gadgets with a single cable is finally at hand. And even if you're not as stoked as I am about Apple finally embracing the universal part of USB, there are optical, metallurgical, and even action-oriented reasons. The iPhone 15
I like him. He has a good energy to him.
I get it. The iPhone 15 doesn't seem all that different than the 14, which means it's not all that different.
We are always getting that to, like, for one, by the way, I think by this point it has been now completely, utterly disproven, right? This mention that Apple was like changing design for like design's sake, right? When Apple switched from like to like that triple camera arrangement, that's one thing, right? But then Apple had like their straight line camera arrangement for their dual camera setups, and then they changed it to a diagonal one, and people were like, oh, Apple is like changing camera arrangements year to year for no reason. We are now years into like those design language. We are going back to the iPhone 11 Pro for like the triple camera setup that we currently have, except for it growing its size. Even the like periscope, like the tetraprism design for the telephoto does not look that different. So this idea that Apple just does shit to change aesthetics from gen to gen is utterly disproven. And in fact, it's way more likely that an Android manufacturer will actually change a certain design aesthetics only to change them than Apple is at this point. Silicon Magic, come on, it's a small tech YouTuber. He doesn't know what wireless charging is. By the way, also, just a small thing. He could have done wireless charging for the iPhone with his foldables, right? It would be 5 watts, probably like 4 watts even actually, but he could have like the Z Flip also has it, right? I know the Fold has it, but he could have charged the iPhone still. He could have plugged those into USB-C and then let the iPhone rest on them. Sure, you can argue maybe he needed his phones for something else, but he never travels with only one foldable. I think he always travels with like the latest Flip, the latest Fold, and probably like the latest Motorola, doesn't he? Like for his long-term testing. So yeah, he didn't think of that. I did. I am a genius. MrMobile, give me a fucking foldable channel, huh? Give me 1 million subs now. I am MrMobile now.
From the 13 or even the 12 before that. Form factor fatigue is a big part of it.
It's not. There's no form factor fatigue. Like, this excuse has been thrown out. Like, people said when the iPhone XS sold a little less than people expected, that there was like form factor fatigue after the iPhone X from the prior year. Right? Like, no, there's no form factor fatigue. People care about like camera upgrades. They want brighter, more beautiful, higher refresh screens if they're enthusiasts and stuff like that. They want a little more storage, stuff like that. Also, they just want to upgrade phones that are 4 or 5 years old anyway at that point. So to me, it's like, like this obsession with like form factor, that comes from him being a foldable guy. It's Silicon Magic, that would have been a wrong combination. Do you mean me and like a foldable channel?
Me to foldables as my daily drivers, and this is indeed just another rectangle.
Yeah, it's another rounded rectangle that looks way better than any of your foldables, is more water and dust proof than any of your foldables, has slimmer bezels than any of your foldables, is built out of a more durable metal than any of your foldables, actually has also like weight advantages in comparison to similarly spec'd foldables, will have better battery life than any of your foldables, will have better cameras than any of your foldables, will have a faster processor than any of your foldables, will have longer software support than any of your foldables, and with even small stuff like the action button and the dynamic island, I would argue it's more fun than most of your foldables.
As rectangles go, it's a pretty special one.
Oh,
The iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max make 3 major changes in addition to that USB-C port I opened with. Starting with one, I wasn't sure I was going to love.
You mean it's a sinful merge to make an iPhone and an Android kiss? Well, we would get to a Romeo and Juliet-like story, and I mean, it's classic literature, right? There are only 8 story types.
I've always appreciated the iPhone's mute switch because I also loved it on the phones that came before it. The Palm Trio and Centro I carried before the iPhone was a thing. But in a world where most people leave their phone constantly muted, this kind of single-purpose...
Do they? I don't know, like my mom gets like 20 phone calls a day, so I guess she cannot afford to do that. I get too little calls to care about muting my phone. Also, I mute my phone more through Do Not Disturb than I do through the mute switch, because then I would usually care more about not getting messages than I care about the phone being silent.
Switch has probably outlived its usefulness. So, Apple replaced it with something I've appreciated on many smartphones over the years, a customizable action button.
R.I.P. the Bixby button.
The best thing about this is that out of the box, it does the exact same thing the old alert slider did. You just press and hold it.
Oh yeah, like an iPhone kit with like a Galaxy Z Flip 5, or like the latest, like the Motorola Razr Plus, whatever generation it's now. Yikesy. Well, at least it would be a USB-C baby at this point.
Pull the ringer on or off, and the phone vibrates with a distinctive haptic buzz for each one, so you know which mode.
Yeah, that's actually interesting that he goes like hands-on this way, and he also calls out like the haptic response. What I would mention here is we've talked about the rumors, obviously, about haptic buttons in general, which might come to the 16 Pro. So the interesting part here is that we would need to have a lot more like haptic engines here, because you obviously don't. Here you get like a haptic response from your haptic motor in the phone, but you also get like a tactile button. Right, it's not like a force touch trackpad that doesn't actually move. It moves ever so slightly, but not enough. And it doesn't click by itself. Everything is done through like the haptic feedback. Here, at least, you still get the tactile feedback from the button. It's just the software also rewards you with like haptics that then flow like almost into your dynamic island, and then the dynamic island does a cool that's a cool animation. So yeah, I actually like that Apple still makes it feel good, even though it seems like the action button, the way it panned out to be, was not the way they originally designed it, which is interesting.
Without having to look at it. If you're not interested in that, you can set it instead to toggle the flashlight or open the camera. And when you're in the camera, it'll double as a shutter button. Or, my personal favorite, you can set it to take a voice memo when you press and hold. Why is this my favorite? Well, because my first ever mobile phone had a dedicated button for...
That's why I wanted to react to MrMobile. He is definitely like the least relevant out of the guys I'm covering here. But he does have a fun perspective on like the history of phones and smartphones, stuff like that.
Recording memos. Like
I haven't seen the video
and
prior.
I'm a sucker for nostalgia, which you know. Actually, maybe my favorite feature of the action button overall is that it might prompt Android manufacturers to bring back buttons like these. They used to be on so many phones.
Yes.
I truly miss them.
As do I.
It stopped being a good idea.
I think the Xperias do have them still, do they?
Titanium.
Custom made.
Titanium.
Titanium alloy.
Yeah.
It's what they use on the space shuttle.
For years, Apple has relied on stainless steel to give the iPhone the kind of heft that reassures folks that spending over $1,000 on a smartphone is a good idea. But heft is you know, heavy.
Oh, he has the 13
By
Pro.
preserving the aluminum frame and replacing the steel.
Oh, also, that doesn't go into like the repairability point that you mentioned prior, Silicon Magic, but there's also something else that Apple mentioned that is very interesting, that goes back to how complicated their like design actually is, which is the way that the titanium and the aluminum are combined on a molecular level, right? Where there's the intersection between like the internal aluminum frame, which obviously needs to be there for like structural integrity, for antenna purposes, for heat dissipation. And what Apple is doing is they actually merged the aluminum with the titanium. Not even like when people remember like the 2012 iMac with like friction stir welding or whatever, but like I have no idea what this process is called at this point. It happened yesterday. But the way they combine it is it allows like the aluminum to still give off its heat directly to the titanium, and it also helps with like radio frequency transparency and stuff like that. So there are reasons why Apple cannot actually make a fair phone, right? And no, I don't mean like a phone that is fair, I mean a phone that is equivalent to the fair phone as we know it. It's because Apple's designs are actually ambitious, actually complicated in ways that many other phones don't. Sometimes when people ask like, oh, why does the iPhone not have a 5000 milliampere hours when it's similarly heavy, similarly sized to like similar Android high-end devices? But then you look into the actual device and you find like things that basically have no real equivalence, like their haptic motors and stuff like that for a great haptic feedback. Sure, Androids do have them by now. It took them years. They're still worse than what is on iPhone, and the Pixel has it, but the Pixel also has other shortfalls. So there's a lot that Apple does, the small things, right? Like don't forget the iPhone 7 Plus like had like stereo speakers technically at the time when Samsung's actually didn't have them. So there's a lot that Apple does that sometimes gets swept under the rug because sometimes Android manufacturers prioritize the really flashy stuff to market, while Apple does not need to do that. They do have the power of the iPhone branding, but that doesn't mean they're resting on their laurels entirely. Nobody forced them to like adopt a titanium chassis here. Like it's like metallurgically more difficult to work with. Sure, it has all those advantages, and that's why Apple did it, but it's also more expensive. So there's a lot that Apple is doing here that I honestly believe is also like will pay off in the way it cannot pay off for many Android manufacturers. When Apple works with something like titanium on the Apple Watch, they can bring it to the iPhone. Obviously, they have had experience with titanium before on like MacBooks, but now they bring it back and they bring it in full force. When they experiment with OLED first on Apple Watch, then they bring it to the iPhone. And everything they're currently bringing to the iPhone, they later can also bring to the iPad, to the Mac. So once they have like micro OLED on their micro LED on the watch, they can then later bring it to everything else. And micro LED is the end goal tech for like regular, like non-headset displays that I'm really waiting for.
Grade 5 titanium, Apple has brought the weight down, and by contouring the edges, it's made the phone more comfortable to hold. What I like about this, though, is that it didn't go back to the more rounded, pillowy footprint of the iPhone.
I still don't get what people had against the rounded, pillowy shape. I know it looks like less brutal, somewhat less modern, and I do appreciate this new look, but I never disliked that old look. If anything, you could make the argument that like the large top and bottom bezels is what gave those old devices an old-fashioned look. I don't think the actual like product, it's like I don't think the actual like curved body was the problem ever.
6 era. You get the sharp looks that came back around with the iPhone 12, but an ergonomic grip that doesn't dig into your palms.
It's also slightly thicker,
I can see it in my eyes.
which helps the camera not be as
If there's a
egregious
downside
as
to
it
the
could
use of
have
titanium,
been.
It's speculative. The metal is difficult to anodize, which means it can be more difficult to colorize. Apple says it used a PVD coating instead, but even so, this year we're seeing much more muted casing colors.
It's not anodized. That's good to know, actually.
White and what I'll call barely blue. So if I were buying one, I'd go for the raw, natural titanium colorway that really doubles down on the metallic look.
Comes from the guy that buys foldables. No, but I understand his logic. I mean, I am buying a raw titanium Apple Watch, the Ultra 2. It's just that I didn't want to. I wanted a black or blue Apple Watch Ultra.
Finish that cuts down on the fingerprints versus last year's side rails.
It's what they use on the space shuttle.
Titanium alloy.
Oh, before we close out the construction segment, Apple pointed out that it re-engineered the internal chassis to make the iPhone more repairable by making the glass backplate easier to replace, which dovetails with its recent reversal regarding right to repair. The final major change came only to the Pro Max, because the 6.7-inch version of the iPhone was the only one big enough to accommodate it. After 4 generations of arch-rival Samsung giving buyers the option of crazy
bad zoom in anything out of sight of good lighting conditions for 2 generations. Also, the first time Samsung introduced 100 megapixel sensors, their photography was shit. It took them like 7 months of software fixes to like make sure that photos are actually sharp, edge to edge and stuff like that. And focus was never really fixed once they introduced like those large sensors, or like that first gen large sensor. So Apple being a little more conservative with certain stuff is positive. Also, I have no real usage for 10x zoom.
Twisted optic telephoto cameras on its Ultra series of smartphones, the iPhone finally sports a super zoom of sorts of its own. The Pro Max replaces the 3x zoom of the iPhone 15 Pro with a 5x telephoto that's clever. Instead of just being mounted sideways, it forces the light to bounce back and forth in this kind of stair-step arrangement and cheats physics that way. I still think Samsung is going to have the edge in extreme zoom situations with its native 10x optical modules, but we'll see how that plays out in the review. One thing I'm not worried about is Apple's continued dominance in mobile video, and portraits, and all those other ineffables that make iPhone cameras so reliable. The 3-axis stabilization is twice as effective as the 14 Pro, and because each photo contains a full focus map, you can adjust the focus of the entire shot after the fact. Now, this is nothing new in smartphones. We've seen manufacturers playing with this capability as far back as 4 years ago with the Nokia 9. And honestly, I've never found it all that useful.
Exactly.
But Apple being Apple, it includes a real-world application for it. Automatic portrait mode. That means you don't need to remember to set the camera mode before you shoot a portrait. You can create one after the fact. I think that's pretty cool. Oh, and when you want to export big video files or even record directly to an external storage drive,
man, those bezels look so small. That's so awesome. Again, I have said before, I don't really care about bezels, but I do love how they integrate almost directly into the slightly rounded off titanium. That looks dope as shit. What happened with the audio?
Oh, and when you want to export...
Okay, my AirPods are still connected. Media source.
Big video files,
okay,
or even
it works
directly to an external storage drive. The Pro and Pro Max have USB 3 data transfer to make that process faster. There are lots of features I didn't get to here, like the brighter screens, dynamic island coming downrange to the 15 and 15 Plus, Qi 2 charging, and Apple's sustainability efforts. But none of them made me break out in a big, goofy grin like this feature coming to the new Apple Watch Series 9 and Apple Watch Ultra 2 in October. The watch takes data from the heart rate sensor, accelerometer, and gyro, and feeds it into a faster neural engine in the new S9 chipset. And the result is that the watch can recognize when you tap your thumb and forefinger together.
By the way, this is so fundamentally Apple, this feature. Wait, why is the media not pausing when I... What is happening with OBS? Guys, is my audio still okay? Like, I'll just briefly... Okay, the audio is not... This is so fundamental. Okay, the audio from the actual OBS was not that great.
You can scroll lists, press buttons, and answer and end calls.
Okay, there seems to be some kind of audio delay, which looks like a problem with just OBS randomly, because I maybe paused and played too much.
Without even touching the
But we're almost done. It's
feels
only
like
2
the
minutes.
future, in a way I'm frankly not used to experiencing from an Apple product. And better yet, it actually works really well. I got to use it for a few minutes, and the watch got my taps right the first time every...
Silicon Magic, it's not twice the speed. It's weirdly different, right? I didn't change any of the properties here. Loop, close when active. Nope, I didn't change anything. It's just a problem of OBS, which is fantastic as always, of course, because this app really needs to be updated for macOS Sonoma. No, it's not a filter either, and it's not any kind of setting. Nope, it's not. Previous scaling, Windows creation, set color. Nope, it's not my fault.
Time. We'll see how it fares out in the real world when I get a chance to review these. If you wanted me to come back from Cupertino with news of an Apple foldable, hell, yeah, me too. But the fact is that the iPhone is the most profound success story in smartphones. And while that's still true, the one thing you don't want to do is say, hey, we got a great product here. Let's change it. I think it's inevitable that Apple will someday release a multimodal iPhone of some kind, whether foldable or rollable. But today...
Yeah, I understand that it's like the video. But to me, for example, when I pause, the audio keeps playing in my ear. So, wait, I might do like an AirPod switch, maybe. I mean, it's definitely not a problem with AirPods. If anything, there could be like a problem that like OBS like imagined for itself.
The changes the company decided to make a
No, it still has the problem.
And the same goes for the things that stayed the same, like most of the pricing. Now, there is a way to make your iPhone feel a little fresher, and that's my sponsor, dbrand. You know the drill. dbrand lets you re-add the real leather that Apple...
Okay, we are done. We are thankfully done here. We're thankfully...
Alright, so today I got a hold of...
Okay, and the MKBHD video seems to be working well, so it really seems like OBS just decided to randomly become a problem here. Guys, can you actually hear and see me well, though, now? Now that no video is playing, otherwise from, like, my beautiful face here. Let me just briefly check on how the stream quality actually looks like. Yeah, like, it seems to be mostly okay now, doesn't it? Briefly listening. Yeah, okay, it seems to be working well when I really just focus on myself, which, again, it's not really what I wanted to do here, but maybe it has to do with, like, me having so many, like, scenes ready in OBS, who knows, at this point. Well, I thought I might be going into like tech spec stuff on like Apple's website, but I really do need to get some sleep. It's now almost 1 a.m. And also tomorrow we actually have a PlayStation State of Play. So very briefly here. State of Play. Yeah. So we do have that. I cannot obviously... so this is what I'll be reacting to tomorrow, with a focus on upcoming indie and third-party releases, and I hope that we have like something really interesting. Silicon, you're asking how satisfied I'm currently with Sonoma. Well, Sonoma by itself has actually been like the most stable beta out of anything. It's just that OBS has problems with it, but outside of it, I actually do really like a lot of the macOS Sonoma features. It's just that I'm so happy with the Mac anyway. I don't think that any individual software release will actually change that much. Seems though like
Alright, so today I got a hold of and got to poke around the new iPhone.
seems though like OBS has some problems now with my face once again, because apparently changing a scene was too much for it. So this was my announcement. State of play tomorrow. I apologize for the problems. I'm gonna wrap it up now, because obviously it makes no sense to continue with those tech problems. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, apologize for the issues. Hopefully we won't